Summer Lake is filling up my inbox, yeah.
I know, they're busy. They're busy. They are busy.
I don't respond to them. Because I figured you do, and I have nothing to do.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Orange County School Board's work session and rule development workshop. The work session has been scheduled today for the purpose of discussing proposed revisions to the following school board policies: IJ, instructional materials; IJL, library materials selection and adoption; and KEC, challenged materials policy. Excuse me. The public will not have an opportunity to participate in this work session to provide public comment because it's not a regularly scheduled board meeting. No action will be taken, and there is no pre-agenda period in which the public would normally address the school board. Rule development workshop will come next, which is the second part of today's meeting, which has been scheduled for the purpose of discussing proposed revisions to the following school board policies: EBB, Accident Prevention and Safety Program; IA, Student Progression Plan; and JIC, Code of Student Conduct; and the 2022-23 Code of Student Conduct, which contains assessor changes only. The school board will be hearing public comments on these three policies. Because this is not a regularly scheduled board meeting, again, there will be no pre-agenda period. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. As I mentioned, board members, well, actually, all of our board members are here in person, which is a delight. And I want to remind board members and the public that we won't be engaging in outside electronic or digital communication during the meeting so that we can focus our entire attention on the matters before us. To my fellow board members and staff, when speaking, please speak directly into your microphone. Make it sure it's turned on so that our YouTube and Orange TV viewers can hear you clearly. And now I would invite you to join us for a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. And now for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First up is School Board Policy IJ, Instructional Materials Work Session. And it is suggested that I turn it over to our General Counsel, Ms. Enval.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Today's work session portion of the meeting will cover proposed revisions to policies IJ, IJL, and KEC, all relating to instructional resources and library materials. We have considered your input over the past few work sessions and have incorporated them into the proposed red lines that the team will be going over with. And with that, I will turn it over to Allison Kibbe and Maurice Dragon.
Thank you so much. Good morning, Chair, board members, and the Superintendent. So as noted, we will review today policies IJ, IJL, and KEC. We'll do a quick review of the timeline and then a summary of the actions and the proposed revisions and next steps, and throughout we'll have questions and opportunities for discussion. Just a quick review of the tentative schedule. We are almost coming up on our one-year anniversary of reviewing.
We're having a little hard time hearing you. Can you pull the mic in a little closer?
Certainly.
As I found you just about have to be touching it to be heard well, so thank you.
No problem. So we're coming up on almost our one-year anniversary of reviewing these policies. We began with the cabinet review and then the work session in July of last year. We had rule development in August and then a work session in January. We'll have the work session today, and then we have scheduled rule development on April 4th, board approval on May 9th, and then the effective date of these policies will be upon approval. So the three policies we will review today are IJ, Instructional Resources and Materials; IJL, Library Materials Selection and Adoption, and KEC, Challenge Materials Policy. I'll now turn it over to Allison Kibbe, who will start off with IJ.
Good morning, everyone. Policy IJ is being revised to include language from recently enacted laws and to clarify the process by which a parent or a resident of the county can object to the board's adoption of instructional materials. Revisions have been made to the existing policy language to include content, formatting, and terminology edits consistent with statutory language. I'm just going to go over the highlighted changes for today. If you scroll to the second page of Policy IJ, you will see that we added some clarification regarding who can be on the review committee. Specifically, selection of review committee members, one or more of whom must be a parent or legal guardian of a child enrolled in a district school who is not also a district employee. On page 4, towards the bottom, in section 3, we made some additional changes and added some statutory references there. So pursuant to section 1006.28 of the Florida statutes, the board is responsible for the content of all instructional materials used in a classroom or otherwise made available to students, whether adopted and purchased from the state adopted instructional materials list, adopted and purchased through the district's instructional materials program under section 1006.283 Florida statutes, or otherwise purchased or made available. The next change that we made is at the bottom of page 4 and at the top of page 5, the degree to which the material would be supplemented and explained by mature classroom instruction as part of a normal classroom instructional program. For purposes of this policy, mature classroom instruction is defined as instruction suited to the student's ability to comprehend the material presented and appropriate for the grade level and age group for which the materials are used or made available. Letter C, or item C, was added as a kind of a parallel to policy IJ. The superintendent or designee may temporarily remove a challenged material during the pendency of a petition for objection to instructional materials if the superintendent or designee believes it will be disruptive to the student learning environment if the challenged material were to remain available, or if the superintendent or designee determines the materials contain pornography or material that is harmful to minors or obscene. Then we made some small changes that were really just semantics. On page 8, there were some inconsistencies with our use of shall and must, and so we chose shall and were consistent with the use of that word throughout the objection area. One additional thing that we added at the top of page 9 is regarding the hearing officer. Within 30 days after the board receives the hearing officer's findings and recommendation, the board at a public meeting will consider the petition, the hearing officer's findings and recommendation, and any evidence presented to the hearing officer and make a final decision on the petition. The board has the authority to reject findings of fact unless such finding is objectively verifiable. The board may review conclusions of law using a de novo standard. And those are all of the highlighted changes that we made to School Board Policy IJ based on your feedback.
All right, thank you. We'll take board feedback. I do have one question on the bottom of page 8.
Yes, ma'am.
It says within 30 days. I think we may have discussed this, or maybe it was in some other area. It says within 30 days after the board receives the hearing officer's findings and recommendations, a public meeting, the board at a public meeting will consider. It makes it sound to me like we have to have the public hearing in 30 days, which I think is the intent. I had concern about the possibility of something unforeseen, natural disaster, or some other reason why we were unable to agenda that. And unless this is statutorily required, which it could be. It is, okay.
It is
I just-
statutorily
yeah.
required. That
Okay.
concern we did address in the other policy.
Say that again?
We did address that concern with the timing in the other policy in IJL.
Yeah,
where
I
it
do
came up as well.
remember it's somewhere we addressed it. Okay. Yeah, I always hate absolute deadlines like that. But, okay, thank you. Any other board member comments? Let me go to Vice Chair Gallo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a couple questions. So I think it was under 4. It was on page 4. And as usual, I just write down notes and then I have to go back and figure out what I was trying to say. It says the classroom instructional program for purposes of this policy, mature classroom instruction, and it defines it, and then it says, instruction suited to the student's ability to comprehend the material presented and appropriate on grade level and age group for which the materials are used and made available. So while we're defining mature classroom instruction, in my mind, it's still not clear on who's going to determine that the material presented is appropriate and is on grade level. So who is going to be making that determination, and how do we make sure that that determination is consistent across the school district?
That is part of the responsibility of the the review committee. One of the things that they have to do is they have to complete a training regarding all of the statutes and requirements for instructional materials.
Follow up?
Absolutely, go ahead.
So I guess my concern is if this is already in the classroom, this material, and it's not going before a review committee, then how will individual teachers define this and understand it, and how do we make it so that it's consistent? Because there's a lot of confusion amongst our teachers, and there's a lot of angst on what they can and cannot allow. So how do we make it as clear as possible to eliminate that confusion and angst amongst our educators?
Ms. Kibbe?
So I think when we were speaking specifically about books, we now know that by statute that when materials are coming in, library materials or even as materials that are going to be inside of the classroom library,
I'm
those
sorry, we
materials.
still can't hear you. Is there anything we can do with the mics? Anybody
see.
know? Because I have room volume almost.
That's okay. I'm going to really project.
You were never planning to be an opera singer. You
No.
thought about it, but decided. Your mom said no. Yeah, go ahead.
You know me too well. So with materials that are either coming in through the classroom library or they are inside of the media center, those materials have to be first reviewed by the library media specialist, a certified library media specialist at the school-based level. For any other materials that classroom teachers are going to use as part of their lesson planning, classroom teachers have that classroom autonomy to use the state standards and then appropriate resources inside of their instruction. But specific to library materials, we do have that review process. And then we have, with the state adoption, those resources have also been reviewed. So the majority of resources that teachers are going to use are resources that have already been reviewed, and then they will then have classroom autonomy for any other resources they want to use.
Go ahead.
Okay, and I appreciate that. Thank you for that answer. I'm still going to kind of double down and ask, okay, so who is making it consistent for our media specialist so that this is easily defined? My issue, and last week we saw examples of this, how unintended consequences happen when we're not extremely clear in our policy, what our policy means, how our policy can be implemented, and how it needs to be, implemented is communicated. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that we have been working on internally as a team is, especially with the review of materials, is we are working on making sure that we have a consistent system of capturing the resources that are either being stored in classroom libraries or inside of the media center, which we already have through Destiny, but especially in classroom libraries. And then if there is a decision that's being made at one site to say that at the classroom library level, that this is a resource that we would like for review, part of what we're looking at in the system that we are exploring is a way to then have that communicated centrally so that we can then look at it overall. So that's going to be part of the steps that we're taking to make sure that there is some consistency so that we don't have materials at one school that some folks are looking at and saying we don't think is appropriate, and then no one knows at another school site.
All right, we'll come back.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
I'll get back in queue. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Felder.
Yes. Thank you, and good morning, all. Okay, I think it's on page 5. I just need some clarification because I'm always being stopped about, the first thing I get stopped with the question, are we not going to be able to teach Black history? You know that. So here on page 5, commented A9, include only instructional materials that accurately portray the ethnic, socioeconomic, cultural, religious, physical, and racial diversity of our society, including men and women in professional, career, and executive roles, and the role of contribution of the entrepreneur and labor in the total development of the state and the United States. My concern, that's the corrected one, right? You corrected it, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I guess my concern is, again, as Board Member Galloway said, and many of the board members feel and know, that many of our teachers and parents, but teachers more than any, they're concerned that the material that they're going to teach, if it's going to get criticized for being indoctrination. And sometimes it's hard to teach any type of historical occurrence in America without sharing the thought process that went into this particular occurrence, how people were thinking when they did what they did. And then, of course, students will make comment because you want commentary, because that's really when learning is, when it happens, you do your Socratic circles, that's when the learning takes place, not so much as the dispensation of material, but when children interact. So my question is, how are we going to measure whether or not that particular teaching is indoctrination? I know we have words, but see, once you're involved in dispensing that material, teaching your children, and you're involved, you're teaching the material and you're allowing the feedback. But some student or some parent seeing the lesson may accuse or say the teacher is doing, indoctrinating the thought process of their children. So I have a concern also that across the board, we need to have consistency. I know it's easier said than done, and sometimes we don't want to micromanage people, but I think if we don't maintain consistency in what we're doing, we're going to have some serious problems down the line. So my question again, how are we going to measure this teaching? Because teaching, I know teaching is an art. It's an art. And and it's creative. It's very creative. Sometimes it's creative as you go, but it's mostly creative. And I just want to make sure the consistency stays. And we're going to have. Tell me. Let me hush. Tell me. Okay. How are we going to do that?
So every teacher is provided with the same instructional materials throughout the district. Every single teacher has access to the same textbooks for their student based on their content area. So they have access to those things in the same way. They can teach them in the same way they need to be consistent.
When you say teach the same way, I'm sorry, what do you mean?
They have access to use them in the same way. They have curriculum resource materials that they can consult as well that are provided by our department, that they can find lessons that are ready-made so that students throughout the district can have the consistency in using the instructional materials that are referred to here in the policy.
So I guess during administrative evaluations when they come in and watch teachers or so forth, they'll be able to pick up and decide whether or not the teacher is being consistent with the district policies. Is that that's how we're going to measure that consistency, or to make sure that it's occurring?
Let me go to the superintendent to respond.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And if I understand the question and concern that both Board Member Gould and now Board Member Felder have expressed, has to do with more of the instructional materials that teachers have had the leeway to select materials outside of what has been adopted by the district. And so in order to ensure that teachers are teaching to the standards, which is what our team, that's what they focus on, the instructional resources, in order to ensure that the teachers then need to restrict themselves to either using the materials that have been reviewed and adopted at the district level, or if they are choosing to use a resource that has not been reviewed, then they need to reach out to content experts to be able to indicate whether those are aligned to the standards and can be used. The only way to ensure that consistency is that you restrict to only what's been approved and adopted by the district. And as part of lesson plan reviews, as planned as walkthroughs, principals and assistant principals are able to monitor the implementation of the standards and the resources. But teachers have, for as long as I've been a teacher and an employee of Orange County Public Schools, had the freedom to select materials outside as long as they deemed it was appropriate.
Yeah.
Okay,
They
but,
need to be able to do that, yeah.
well, if they're able to do that, then you're still running the risk that it's not approved by the state and that it doesn't allow for teaching to the standard if you're leaving it strictly up to the teacher. Doesn't mean that they are not able to make that decision, but people have different interpretations. And that's why we go through a process, through a committee that includes a variety of individuals, including content experts, to be able to determine that the resources are aligned to the standards and can be used.
Okay, I appreciate the answers.
We're going to have to come back.
Go ahead. I guess
Okay,
just
we'll
come back. Just
Okay,
come back.
thank you. Okay, actually, I'm up next, so let me just make two brief comments. Well, actually, a follow-up question on that. Superintendent, I'm not sure if it seemed that what you were saying is that teachers are still allowed to use outside materials, but at some risk. That is correct.
Okay. Teachers have the ability to determine what resources they are using to teach the standards, and we have always allowed them to use their professional judgment to make that decision. The concern that I'm hearing from the board is now the consequences that could be tied to an individual teacher interpreting materials to be appropriate, and then when reviewed by a content expert or DOE, that's a different interpretation.
So, Superintendent, I don't want to single anybody out, but there was recently some material that was brought to my attention. I know I shared it with you about something that was read to our students that clearly I did not think was appropriate. The board ultimately is responsible, and the board has no control over this. So I am concerned about the issue of consistency, and I am concerned about the responsibility that we bear that we have no authority over unless this changes. I'm not trying to tie the hands of our teachers, but under the law, the way it is currently written, I think we may need to revisit that.
Right.
The second issue I wanted to mention briefly, if board members noticed that we start out by talking about we're selecting, not adopting materials, and then throughout the document, we are adopting materials and sometimes selecting materials, and sometimes DOE is adopting and sometimes they're selecting. So I did ask Ms. Emval if we could do a search and replace and be consistent. And in case anybody else had that question, I just thought I would give the answer she gave, which is that language is straight out of statute. So in order to be consistent with statute, that's why we have the inconsistency in our policy. But I think we all know from now on that adoption and selection is apparently synonymous. The other one comment I did want to make, Member Felder, you were talking about the confusion about whether or not we can still teach African American history, and it's very clear to me that we can, but
It's clear to me, but to the people.
no, I know it's not clear to everybody. But you also mentioned about teaching the thought behind, and the one concern I have about a couple of things that I have seen in terms of material that was recommended is material that infers a thought process on historic figures. And I think what we should be teaching is facts, what actually happened, as opposed to what we think somebody might have been thinking when they did something. And I raise this not just historically, but I think most of us who have served in a public office very long have had that experience where you made a decision and then people ascribe to that decision motivations and thought processes that are often not accurate. And then we read it all over social media, why we did something. And I've always found that, I don't know what the term is, just offensive and wrong to assume a motivation that may not be correct. So I think when we're teaching history, although I will acknowledge that history today and what we believe to be facts today might be very different than what we believe to be facts a couple of years ago, and we may determine that the facts are even different in the future, but I would caution against getting into the minds of historical figures and saying why they did something when we don't necessarily know. Yeah. All right, with that said, let me go to Member Gould.
Thank you. We must follow the law. We must make sure that we make it as easy as possible for our teachers. Where I have fears right now is that this is so difficult to maneuver that it is taking the experiential and excellent learning opportunities away from the masses of our children.
Yes.
And that is what I'm concerned about. So when you say teach the same way, does that mean all of the content has to be delivered, and this may be more for the superintendent than it is for the team, that all the content has to be delivered in the same lecture style using the same, because we knew when we did Marzano and we had to have everybody saying the same thing walking down the hall, that did not work. It did not work for our kids, and it did not work for our teachers. So that's one question. Let me get them all out. Current events. That is timely information. Unfortunately, many current events and many what so-called reporters are really pundits that are giving opinion, but should our kids not be talking about those world topics as long as they're given both points of view? Historical artifacts coming into the classroom, or testimony like the song Amazing Grace, which was a slaver who understood that what he was doing was wrong and clearly wrote the words from his perspective about it being wrong. Jefferson, Franklin, Hamilton all have perspectives during that time that are very well documented in their own hand. So, Uncle Tom's Cabin is another one written in that time frame, Are those things that can be introduced into the classroom under this legislation?
So the simplest answer I have is that you teach the standards. And if you are in doubt as to whether a resource can be used, that you reach out to our content experts to be able to help make that decision. We have always, for the last 10, 15 years, focused on teaching the standards. And if the resources mentioned are part of the standard and do not violate current rules and legislation, then the teacher will be guided to use that resource. I will be very honest that lends itself to interpretation. And so we're very fortunate that our team does have a good rapport with content experts up at the DOE, and they reach out when there are questions regarding resources and content that we are not sure of. But in order to have a consistent message, we are teaching the standards and the resources that teachers are using, whether they are those that have been adopted and incorporated into the district's list of resources, curriculum materials, or if a teacher is choosing to use an outside resource that has not been vetted by the district.
Follow-up?
Yes.
So I hear that clearly, and thank you. I know that our team is doing the absolute best in trying to interpret what is very confusing, because when you talk to legislators, they say, oh, no, that's not what we meant. But it kind of is when we see things that are happening and the severity of it. Have we added staff to be able to coach our teachers? Because this is also a retention and recruitment issue. Mm-hmm. It's a huge one, because it's not just the money, it's being able to come in and inspire students, and we're making it so difficult to have those aspirational and inspirational leaders in our classrooms.
So the answer to that is maybe. It's according to your interpretation. So part of the reorganization is significantly reducing the ratio of principal supervisors to schools, which allows for greater interaction and conversations. Additionally, we are looking at personnel that currently sits in the chief academic office to actually work directly within those learning configurations to be able to have more direct support. We certainly can look at more staff. I can tell you that the Chief Academic Office has been advocating for additional staff. However, we are trying, first of all, to have the reorganization be cost neutral, and additionally, we are looking to save as many dollars for possible raises. So I will defer to the board for which way you'd like for me to proceed as it relates to additional staff.
All right. Member Castro-Dental.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you to Allison and Mo for all of your work. This is not easy, navigating this bureaucratic mess. I appreciate it. And of course, we can teach history in our schools. And I have I diverge a little bit with saying that we must only teach facts. Of course, we teach the facts of history, but you don't separate that from the context of history. You don't separate a variety of perspectives. You still include that. You still allow students to have discussions guided by their teachers. And you look at the causes and effects, and this is a great time to teach critical thinking and the importance of our history to our future as well. And I think when we just tell people stick to the facts and don't do any more research and don't do any more interpretations, that's indoctrination. That's what we have to avoid. when it comes to the outside materials in our classrooms, we have to allow teachers to use those resources that they have used to supplement the discussions, the lessons, because as great as the district is with providing resources, sometimes you have just the perfect book to go with that lesson to make the case, to teach that standard. And they're not always these esoteric books that you find somewhere on some bookshelf up high, but they're commonly used books. Teachers share materials, and I think the district needs to take the burden off the teachers. And when the teachers have their list of books, their classroom books that are posted, if they're posted, then that should be a sign that they've been approved, they've been reviewed, and that they may go forward with any of those books. We've got to provide some kind of assurance that what they have in their library is okay. I don't know if that's by simply posting their books, they have that permission to go forward. We need to take that fear away. It is, even with teachers who've been teaching a long time, who know that the value of the resources they have, they're still questioning what other people are interpreting as inappropriate. And it's really affecting how well our teachers can teach. So I hope that there is some way that the district takes the responsibility and relieves the teachers so that they're not fearing risking their certification. And maybe if they add more books to their library or their resources during the year, that there's some kind of review process where they just look and say, is this book reviewed district-wide as okay? Is there a way to go and find that so that we give them that reassurance? If that book is not there, is there one person they can go to and say, check this one book? Just a simple process so that we're not left wringing our hands. And I've seen the discussions between the teachers and the librarians. Librarians don't always know. They're just as nervous as well. So this is a very tenuous time. It's a difficult time to be a teacher. And whatever we can do as a district to take on some of that responsibility, I'd like to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Casterdental. Member Gallo.
Thank you. So I do have a couple follow-up questions. Is my mic on? Okay. So I think in number C, I think it was on page 5, we alluded to either the superintendent or a designee can take materials off the shelf as it's challenged. So would the designee be one person? Will there be a designee at each school? What does that designee look like? And I'll get through and then you can come back. And then this is me, but de novo standard, what is that? Okay. A little explanation on that, please. And then CPOMs, our teachers use CPOMs all the time, and the material, that content material, I believe is approved and placed on there by the Department of Education. So if there's something on CPOMs that a teacher downloads or used teaching the standard and then it's deemed not appropriate, whose fault is that? Is that the Department of Education's fault for not doing a good enough job vetting CPOMs, or is that the teacher's fault? Because I'm worried about that. And just to make a little comment, I echo with what my fellow board members have stated. I'm really concerned about the teachable moments with our teachers, just that really kind of basic instruction where you get into these deep conversations, and that's what makes learning so much fun, and what makes teaching so much fun. So I am concerned that teachers are really going to be nervous, even with student-led discussions, which we believe are allowed to be had, right? Because, again, as we saw last week, what we thought we know and we thought we were following the law, we were told we were, in fact, not following the law, and people were going to get in trouble. And I don't want any of our employees to come under fire because we believe we know what we know, and then we find out that what we thought we knew isn't what we knew at all.
Okay. Member Byrd.
Well, I meant like, they can
Oh,
answer
I'm
my
sorry.
questions.
Okay, I thought, I was waiting, but I was like, nobody's saying anything.
So
Maurice?
for the first item, the superintendent or superintendent designee, and if that would be one or multiple, that is a discussion that that we'll have with the superintendent to determine. De novo is
Maurice, I'll take it.
okay. Go ahead.
Members of the board, de novo is basically a legal standard, but what that essentially says is you review it anew. You don't give deference to the finding of the committee down below. That's what that means. So you all will come at it with fresh eyes. Sometimes in the law, you have to give deference to the findings down below on a legal conclusion. De novo means you don't have to give that deference. And as for the question on CPALMs, certainly if it's in a state-approved material and it goes out, the teacher has a ready built-in defense to say the state has approved this material. I should not get in trouble for utilizing a state-approved material.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Member Bird, I'm sorry, Member Front.
Now that I've waited so long, I got to think of what I was going to ask. I know I wanted to get back to, hold on, I think it was page 4, what Gallo had mentioned regarding the, hold on, I'm reading my notes. I think it is more that we're looking at the supplemental material. So same that she was saying, because I've seen this firsthand where a teacher selects something that she felt was okay, and it is more of pushing one view instead of allowing two views to be shown so that students learn how to critically think. And so who exactly, maybe that's the superintendent then, who exactly is checking that? When you say the content experts, who would that be that student or that teachers are going to?
Dr.
So
Vasquez?
content experts could be individuals at their particular school, like the curriculum resource teacher, the reading teacher, the media specialist. It would also include individuals in our district offices that are in teaching and learning that they email and reach out to.
Okay, perfect. And then just one quick comment about I think Black history has been a huge one. I know this is more about, resources and the curriculum, so not necessarily books, but I have heard a lot of talk about, not being able to teach Black history or removing Martin Luther King books or amazing books that show us Black history. So I think as a board, or even, as a county, I think we need to make it very clear that obviously we want to teach Black history. The issue is when teachers bring in or topic, the discussion begins in the classroom that points out that certain kids of certain races, so for instance, that white kids would be born inherently racist, and that has been brought up in classes and discussed. And I think we just need to make sure that teachers are not pushing that on students, but more saying this is what happened in history. How can we make sure that this doesn't ever happen again? So just my thoughts.
Member Byrd.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, hold on. I've got a lot of notes here. Let's go back to page 4. I kind of piggybacking on what Member Gallo said about number A3. That whole statement there to me is just a little confusing. And I understand kind of the process behind it, but I believe that when we're talking about supplemental materials that we pretty clearly state in here the guidelines, that it's the age of the student should be taken into consideration, the educational purpose, which pretty much covers the gamut as far as I'm concerned. Is there an educational purpose? We're relying on our teachers and their
expertise as professionals to be able to decide if something they're bringing into the classroom is appropriate has a purpose, an educational purpose. I don't really know that we need another whole section that says, we just said that, but also it needs to be part of a mature conversation, and this is what we're saying about defining maturity. I feel like it's just too much and not necessary if we are relying on our teachers to be professionals, which I still think that we have an obligation to do. As Member Gould said, this is a retention and recruitment issue. It's very vague, and I feel like it just, I don't know. It's redundant, thank you, and I just don't like it. And as far as the chair said, we do have we are held responsible for the materials in our classroom, but I think the way that we are held responsible is by having a process for a parent to go through if they object to something that a teacher brings into the classroom. And that's, we have objection forms for that exact thing, and it's in this policy, objections to instructional materials. So that's the way we're holding our teachers accountable, by allowing parents to bring forward these objections. Because the bottom line is, we've got 25,000 teachers in this district. There are 25,000 teachers every day doing the right thing, inspiring these kids every day with discussions and not just reading lesson plans, because that's the last thing we want. Because I'll tell you, from my experience as a student, and I'm sure all of you are the same way, the lessons you remember from school are not the ones that, anyone came in the classroom and just read lesson plans. The lessons you remember from school are the ones that inspired you with ideas and made you think and made you work with other students and have conversations. And we don't want those things to stop, because that's where real learning takes place. So I think that we have to be really, really careful about making sure we're following the law, and that's what we did here. We're saying it needs to be age appropriate, has to have educational purpose, cannot contain pornography, and if a parent doesn't like it, this is the means they take to object to it. And so that would be kind of my my take on that. There might come a time when when one particular teacher maybe brings in something that may be questionable, and that's why we allow parents the option to, of course, as the law says, object. So that's my concern with that one. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Byrd. Member Salamanca.
Thank you, Chair. I do want to echo that. I think I always fear creating policy by having the exception be the one that does that, right? Because we have ways for parents to challenge and for parents to speak out about something that they feel is inappropriate. But my biggest concern is to double down on teachers' times and give them more work to do when it comes to telling them exactly what they want to teach. That's incredibly disrespectful to a profession that is already not paid what they should be. And I think there's ways in which other districts and sometimes even universities deal with something like this, which is there's sometimes a very clear syllabus at the beginning of the semester or of the year that highlights all the reading materials that would be presented during the class. And that's an opportunity for parents and students to review and challenge ahead of time and opt out of that. But I think that's there's probably better ways we can approach that rather than just be reactive on being told to teachers what they have to teach exactly, same materials and no supplementals. So I think there's maybe other ways that this board can consider an actual implementation of this policy, but I think from the policy perspective itself, I think we're abiding by what state adoption looks like and what district adoption looks like, and we're doing the best based on the feedback we've had over the several work sessions and the statutes. But I want to make sure it's a good balance and actual implementation between challenging and not telling our teachers verbatim what they have to be teaching all the time.
Thank you, Member Salamanca. Member Felder.
Thank you, Chair. This has been quite eventful conversation. I think was designed for that purpose. Listening to Member Byrd and Gould and all of the board members, Gallo and Salamanca, and of course with Board Member Farrant's concern. You know, in the late 60s, a man by the name of Jerry Butler made a song called Ain't Understanding Mellow. You know, I think that this district has been blessed with a plethora of talented teachers, which I was one at one time. And I do believe that we have to trust that the teachers that we have, and with a board such as we have right now, to support and superintendent support this art of pedagogy that we're going through, we have to know that if there is a concern and that a parent can come and talk to the teacher and he or she can share the lesson. I can't remember a time when I taught that I didn't have a preset syllabus. And when they came to open house, I put it on the board with pictures and visuals and all of that to know exactly what I was going to teach. And I've had, out of the years, maybe one or two parents who didn't want me to teach about Martin Luther King. I said, well, I'm teaching Martin Luther King and Benjamin Franklin. I'm teaching them all, teaching everything. This is literature. But for the most part, I think that the retention is a concern. And as a board, I'm confident that we will adopt a policy, that we'll be able to do something to make sure that we're following the law of the land in terms of what we're supposed to do, and that our teachers will not feel intimidated and leave, that they'll want to stay, that they'll want to share what they have, because our students need the opportunity to think. They need the opportunity to think. And my last concern is this: how does one determine one's motivation? I mean, how do you do that? You can't do that. So it's my hope that our teachers will never feel that they are not in a position to inspire. We can't get so bogged down with rules and policy that we forget this whole thing, the art of teaching and learning. So that's my concern. I've listened to a lot, and a lot of what you've said I agree with. I don't need to repeat it. But I'm coming back to my teachingness that's in me. They cannot lose what brought them to the career of teaching. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Felder. So I sense that there is a disagreement that is more of a misunderstanding. So let me circle back to the concern that I had and to Member Castor-Dental comments you made about context. I completely agree that when you're teaching history, you have to teach it in the context of what was taking place. The issue that I had was with particular material that stated as fact why a historic figure did what they did. as opposed to stating as fact what they did and the context of what was going on in our history. I think that we've talked about critical thinking. I think that is a perfect opportunity to say, this is what was going on, this is what this person said, this is what this person was doing, and then have the dialogue with the students. Why do you think they might be doing that? Not, I'm going to tell you what was in their mind, I'm going to tell you what their motivation was. Member Gould went through this just a week ago by sending out a social media post about wanting input. What was her motivation? On social media, a lot of people defined what it was and stated as fact, that it was this. And other people thought it was that. The reality is nobody but Member Gould knows what her motivation was. But is it a good exercise for our students to be presented with the facts of what happened to the best of our understanding and then discuss what might have been the motivations? I think that's the critical thinking. Where I think it crossed the line is to say, I can tell you why they did that. That's because they were bad people and they were dishonest people, and maybe there was a different context. Member Gould was trying to accomplish something positive and worthwhile, but that was not the motivation attributed to her. And it's happened to me. I'm sure it's happened to all of you. I could say that about Orange County Public Schools when it comes to CEAs. I could say that when I came here, they weren't fully calculating the cost of building schools. I could attribute that to all kinds of nefarious motivations, none of which would be accurate. And so in telling that history, I think the history is this is what happened, and allowing kids to debate and discuss the why is where that critical thinking comes in, but never stepping over the line and stating something to be a fact when it is your opinion of what somebody else is thinking. And I don't know why it's such a big deal to me. Maybe it's my life experiences and the number of times that I have seen it happen to me and to others. And I push back really hard, even myself, when I see people in high places and I'm so certain I know why they're doing what they're doing, but I constantly remind myself I cannot know for certain another person's motivations. I can only think I might know them, but I can't state them as fact. So that was the primary difference. In terms of the opportunity to think, that's exactly what we need to be doing. We can't expect our kids to just, well, we used to do that. We used to expect them to just come in and memorize. That's not teaching them how to think. And so I am in agreement with, I think, everybody up here, although it doesn't feel and sound like it right now because I don't think I articulated very well the first time what I was thinking. So and we can disagree. At the end of the day, y'all may just think she's nuts. On that one, she's just dead wrong, and that's okay too. But as I'm listening to this, I don't think that we're on that different of a page. I just think sometimes communication falls short, and I think mine did in that case. I also had a note here. Oh, and one other thing I do want to comment. It is, just for the record, it is my nature to play devil's advocate. I do it with everything. I do it constantly with myself. So if, from time to time, if you hear me push back on something that doesn't necessarily mean I disagree, it's sometimes for the sake of putting out another perspective because I think it's helpful. If we're all on the same page, I will sometimes throw out another perspective because more perspectives, I think, help us make better decisions. So if you got inside my brain, you'd see it. It's sometimes a very difficult place to be because I'm always arguing with myself. With that said, Member Gould, you're recognized.
So thank you, Chair. This is the perfect example of building understanding, of listening to one another, and also building empathy, right? And one of our biggest challenges right now, not only in our schools but in society, but especially in our schools, is empathy. And if this seems too demonstrative and too difficult to navigate, these critical kinds of discussions and conversations and true listening will not happen, and we will lose empathy. And I understand what Member Ferrant was saying about the guilt, but how do you define the delivery to build empathy without understanding that there were winners and losers whenever you're talking about oppression? And that's anywhere in history. If you're talking about the Egyptians and the Jews, if you're talking about the Romans and the rest of the world, how do we, not blatant, I know there's always the one-offs that there is blatant, because you're white, you should feel this way, and because you're black, you should feel that way. But that's the exception, not the rule. And I am along with Member Salamanca, that I'm very worried about all this language and making people feel like they're in such a box that we are not building the kind of value-based, empathetic citizens who can actually think on the job, because we're restricting so many things that they can be exposed to and discussed, whether reality or perception, but perception is reality. So that's and that's what's making this job so difficult, I think, for all of us, and especially for the superintendent and the team, is this ability to stay within the law and not put teachers and principals and even other parents under fire, but really have a robust learning environment. And I know I'm just repeating at this point, but I think empathy should be the benchmark with which we look at this. We have to have a benchmark on how we're going to measure this in some way. And that would support our discipline issues, it would support our learning environment, and maybe there's even tools to teach teachers to deliver that in their professional development through an empathetic eye. Because then you're always presenting more than one point of view, right? Because you're trying to get an understanding of motivations. You may not know them, but you're trying to understand them. So anyway, I'm done.
Thank you, Member Gould. Superintendent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do want to clarify a couple of comments that were made by board members and by staff. And so lesson plans are reviewed, they're not read. And so my comment about us being able to monitor how teachers are implementing the curriculum is that as part of lesson plan review, which varies from school to school, they can see if there is anything that is maybe raises a brow, that they can have conversations about the teacher to ensure that what's being used is appropriate. The second has to do with the supplemental resources. There's a plethora of resources, and certainly we trust every one of our teachers. What I have been hearing is that they want more structure so that they are not put in situations where there's a threat of their certificate being revoked. And what we have seen is that despite processes and interpretation, DOE can pick up the phone, make a phone call, and say we are looking into this matter. My understanding, and I will seek clarification from the commissioner, is that when we are made aware of a possible resource or lesson that it has been taught or is going to be taught, that we are given the opportunity to review it, talk with the teacher, and then make a decision about whether to proceed with that resource or not. And I have I have every belief that that is still the direction that Department of Education would like for us to follow, that they are there to help guide us when we are uncertain. And the problem that we're facing is that there is a great deal of interpretation. We have a situation right now where there was an inappropriate book that was used. It was reviewed and vetted by the media specialist who deemed it appropriate. And so that puts our teachers in a position of uncertainty. And so to be able to have a procedure, a process for them, if they feel that they need to reach out, not that we are questioning their expertise, not that we are questioning their judgment, but to give them the choice. I'm not sure who can I go to make sure that somebody else has looked at this. The vast majority of what's being taught in our classroom is fine. I would venture to say that, 98% of what's being delivered in the classroom is not questionable to anyone. But there is a lot of room for interpretation. There's also a lot of avenues for our parents, our constituents, our community members to voice concerns. It's not just through our process. They can email DOE, and then DOE reaches out to us. And so I want to make sure that teachers understand that we are not questioning their expertise. We want to be able to provide them as much support as they feel they need, so they are not put in a situation where they feel, I don't have someone that I can go to just make sure this is okay. And then we are certainly not asking people to teach the same way. We are saying that we teach the standards, and I will say that day in and day out. We are here to teach our students the standards. How you teach it, the style that you use, the techniques, the strategies, that's all up to a teacher. And their experiences and how they believe their students are going to best receive that knowledge so that they retain that information as part of the learning process. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Superintendent. Member Vice Chair Gallo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So that leads me, I guess, to a concern shared by the entire board through this whole process, because this isn't the first time we've seen these policies, is the consistency. So if we had a book that the chair believes should not have been read to a class, it was vetted by a media specialist to be appropriate, where's the consistency? Could another media specialist said, no, that's not appropriate, and we would have it in one school, not another? So again, I'm going back to, how are we consistent? How do we make sure that if one media specialist deems it not appropriate, that that's communicated so that it can go to a higher process? Because I don't feel that that should fall on one person. I don't think that one person within our district, without transparency, should be able to pull a book for the entire district or really for that school. I think any book that's deemed, and I'm not talking about the ones that aren't used, that they pulled. I know that we've done this since the beginning of time, where we've vetted books in our library. I'm talking about the books that they say, this is not appropriate material for this age group, that has to go to a higher level than just that media specialist to be vetted. Because if it's not appropriate for that age level at that school, it might not be appropriate for any of our schools, number one, or two, that media specialist could have just gotten it wrong and it is appropriate. So the checks and balances have to be in place, because the last thing we want to do is, through fear and the lack of transparency, create an environment where we are restricting the flow of material to our students. That's the last thing that we want, because it is so important to have two sides to everything, to have that critical thinking. And we're not, I didn't run for office to be the literature police. I ran for office to create good policy so that our children can receive a high quality education. So I am concerned about that, and I've been clear. But my question is, and I guess this is to Dr. Vasquez, we've had a lot of conversations up here about, me included, about what I've heard from teachers that they're afraid of. What is the general consensus from our teachers? What are they saying? Are they afraid? Are they rolling with the punches? Like, what is the general consensus with our teachers out there? Like, how worried as a board should we be with the state of mind of our teachers over some of these policies?
So that's a difficult question to quantify because I don't have an exact number. I can tell you that in my conversations with teachers, through my visits, through my meetings, and my conversations with Clinton McCracken, there is definitely an increase in the concern amongst our teachers about resources that they use, and the interpretation of the content that they are teaching. We certainly can, put out, a survey, and I don't know if Clinton has done that as part of a survey he I think recently put out or is going to. I can tell you that a lot of our teachers are doing their thing. If they have a question, they're talking to their principal. It is not an angst that we see across every school. An example would be when the information came out about the books and having a list of the books. And so we had, a flurry of questions that we were able to answer and push out consistent information. And we were also able to give schools some advice as to how they may be able to accomplish the task by using volunteers or using some staff at the school as long as they've had their training. We talked about students being able to earn community resource hours, for listing the books. So we were able to work with our Classroom Teacher Association to hear concerns they were hearing alongside what our staff and I was hearing, to be able to send out clear communication about what was and what wasn't. I can only say that I think the more clarity we have and consistency in our communication, the more at ease they will feel. Our staff certainly has done an incredible job of trying to respond in a very short period of time to the number of requests they have received. But as you can imagine, with over 14,000 teachers, and while they're not all calling at the same time, there has definitely been an influx in the number of classroom teachers that are reaching out for guidance and for advice. As for the consistency, our staff is working on the process. We have been asked by DOE to submit a list of the books that we have currently pulled. We suspect that DOE is going to give us a list this summer as to books that have been pulled, and they may make a recommendation that these books be pulled from all of our libraries. I don't know that for a fact, but we are looking at a process whereby we also then monthly reach out to our schools and ask them what books have been removed, whether it was for pornography, age appropriateness, or other, and then review that to ensure that if there, especially with pornography and age appropriateness, that if there is a school or schools that have deemed a book to have pornography, that we don't have that on the west side, but we've removed it on the east side. So staff is working on that process. We're waiting to hear from DOE as well. Are they going to continue to ask us that? Is it going to be a yearly event so that we're consistent and we're not going back and forth? So that is how we are trying to make sure there's consistency in our schools. But currently, I just want to make sure the board is aware, and General Counsel can correct me if I'm wrong, they do have that ability to remove a book, and we currently are not collecting that information. We can go into Destiny and see if books have been removed, but we currently are not collecting that information. We're waiting now to the end of the school year so that we are able to do everything at one time as we're waiting for more clarification from DOE.
Member Gould.
does this policy, this is more of a technical question, does this policy cover artificial intelligence and use of the chatbot ability to help build content, curriculum, conversations?
No, that is not addressed in this policy.
So that may be something that, as that becomes more widely used, that we want to discuss or even provide some training on, not to limit their ability, but to understand that if you don't put in all the keywords you want, you're going to get a lopsided return. So.
Member Byrd?
Thank you. I like the idea of having the resource for teachers at the district level, and I would be in favor of helping out with the hiring, because I know that they must be overwhelmed. But I think that that's a really important resource for teachers as they, are concerned and worry about, they just wonder if something they're using supplemental is appropriate or not. It'd be nice if they had like a hotline or, could easily get in touch with someone at the district to give guidance to that. So I am all in support of assisting that in whatever way we can. And then the question about, one media specialist, weeding a book from their collection. I know that, like you said, they do have that prerogative, as they do every year, to take books out of their library. But we're in a different, time now. And if they remove a book, I agree that it needs to move up. If a book is removed for the reason of, obviously inappropriateness in any way, that maybe there's a way, instead of waiting for the district to come once a month, maybe there's a system where they can submit that book that they have removed because they felt it was inappropriate, put it into a database, and then that would move up through like a committee to get reviewed district-wide. Because I also have the concern, although I realize every community is different, so maybe for one school, a media specialist might seem like this is inappropriate for her community, but at another, they may not. So that gets into a whole nother thing. But as you said, if it's something that is obviously very inappropriate, we certainly we want to be careful, and we want to protect our teachers too. The whole thing it's so difficult. It's so difficult. Unnecessary, right. Also, the supplemental materials for classrooms, we've said that many teachers do a syllabus at the beginning, and teachers share resources. Maybe we could have a district-wide list of supplemental resources, like for, let's say, I don't know, American history. Here's some outside resources that teachers can add to it. Here's a good resource I found that other teachers can go in and look at, and that way it might make teachers feel better if they see that other teachers are using it. Also, I think this was brought up at some other time about hearing from our CTA representative during these kinds of work sessions, or not like public comment, but as part of the discussion, to be able to hear from him, because I think that would be really great to be able to answer Member Gallo's question. He's in the audience. We could have him share his interpretation. I think it's really important for the board to be able to hear that as well when we're trying to make these decisions. So I would just like to bring that up again. I think we have discussed it before, but I'd like to bring that up again.
Dr. Vasquez, did you want to respond?
Sure. So I do meet monthly with Mr. McCracken, and I also meet with Mr. Pollard once a month. And certainly we can include in that conversations about policy, or we can have a separate meeting to gain input on the policy, because I know we do share that with them ahead of the work session or rule development, just like we do with board members. So we certainly can work on that.
Thank you. I have a follow-up question, Superintendent. Several board members have mentioned that because we have a process by which parents can challenge the materials we're using in our classrooms or in our libraries, that addresses the accountability, and that as long as we've created this process, that neither the media specialists, the teachers, at least this is what I think I understood a couple of board members to believe, that kind of took everybody off the hook because there's a challenge process. I would like to hear from DOE on that, because I doubt that that's the way they will actually view this, especially in light of recent events. I have a feeling that if there is material that is blatantly inappropriate, that the fact that a parent appealed it won't, and there was a process for them to appeal it, I don't think is going to stop the DOE from questioning and possibly trying to find a way to reprimand whoever allowed that material. I'm not trying to create false fear. I just think it would be good for us to know what DOE is likely to do in those situations.
So, I'm sorry, may I?
Yes, please.
Yes. So, my opinion is that they would look to the superintendent and the board to ensure that we're doing everything possible to ensure that we're following the rules and statutes that are in place. Certainly, the parent's ability to appeal is one way. The media specialist being able to review that. But we already have an example of where we had a media specialist that approved something that then came back as maybe questionable. And so I would do everything in my power to ensure that we have processes in place, including, I love the idea of having like a hotline where our teachers could call. It really is a matter of supporting the teachers. It is monitoring, it is ensuring, but this really is about making sure our teachers feel that they have the supports necessary if they have a question. If they feel comfortable about it, then that's fine. But if there's someone that is questioning, and maybe it's a new teacher, maybe it's not our seasoned teachers, but some of our new teachers who may not be sure, can I use this excerpt? That they could reach out quickly and say, could you take a look at this and let me know if this is age appropriate? I think that would be welcomed. I don't think we are looking to add more to their plates. I don't want to require anything. I want to be able to give them resources that they can choose to take advantage of if they feel it's needed. And again, I want to reiterate that when we met earlier in the fall, my impression was that if it's brought to our attention that there's content or a book that's inappropriate, that our response is to be able to look into it and then act accordingly, whether it is appropriate or not, and that consequences will not be rendered at that time. It's if we don't act that there would be consequences. So I hope that.
I think that answered my question. So if we have processes in place, and if we do find something that should not have been used, and we take appropriate action, that you don't think there would be consequences associated with that. Okay. Okay, thank you. Member Castellanos.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't want to belabor this discussion past what we need to for this one policy, because we still have others. But I find it striking that even on this board, I sense fear. And I can hear it in our word choices. I can hear it in the way we are tiptoeing around. And we are fearful of the DOE. And what a sorry place to be. That we can't trust the agency that's supposed to be looking out for us. And I worry about the direction we're going. I don't think we should be checking with the DOE on our processes. We are elected by our community to look out for the interest of our students and our teachers. This question of what is appropriate, of course, none of us want something that's inappropriate in our classes. The question is who gets to decide? And we have processes in place because we are public schools. And our community has a say as well. Mm-hmm. And when we circumvent those processes that we have in place, we are allowing people to just say, I'm going to email the superintendent. I'm going to notify her. That way, she can remove it for us. And that is inappropriate itself, talking about what's appropriate and what's not. You cannot just circumvent our processes that we have in place for our community to participate, for our teachers and parents to know what's happening. And I think we need to stand firm and know that we are going to support our teachers. We are going to support the freedom to read. We're not going to, like they're talking about in Tallahassee, they want to ban elementary school girls from talking about their periods.
Richard.
As if we don't have girls that start their periods in elementary school. When you're talking about a book that has some crudely drawn doodles of middle-aged people to show you what a naked body looks like, and it's meant for older kids in a health class, that's not inappropriate. That is not erotic. It's the opposite of erotic. It is not meant to titillate. It is meant to instruct. And we have to know the difference. This is where trust in our professionals comes from. Trust in educating people about life. The path we're going down, I worry about what our graduates will be. What information will they not have? What are we sheltering them from? Someone might think that a fifth grader reading a book, A Bridge to Terabithia, is inappropriate because a child dies. And we have to protect our kids from that knowledge. But this happens. It happened in Nashville yesterday. We have to allow our kids to read about reality. We can't protect them from everything. We have to allow our high school kids to read about rape. It happens. They can learn about how someone else deals with it. It doesn't prevent, if we keep this book from them, it doesn't prevent that from happening to some of our students. And we can't just start making a list of inappropriate topics and ask the DOE for their permission. And I'm very upset by this discussion and what's happening to our role as board members and our responsibility. And I think we need to have a different focus of our discussion. Thank you.
Member Byrd.
Well, there's not much left to be said after that. Thank you, Dr. Castor-Dental, for saying everything I was thinking. I just had written on my paper when Chair, I understand. I thank you for clarifying, and I think what you were saying was accurate in that, you know, the concern for what the DOE will do. But my note I wrote down on my paper was, it's obvious that we have no way of knowing what the DOE will do. After last week, I think we all saw that. We thought we were following the law. We thought we were doing things right, and apparently they said we weren't. So I don't think there's any way to be sure that we are going to be out of the hairs of the DOE other than to put in place what statute says, which I think what we've done in this policy, and to have the support that the superintendent has said that our teachers will have. And I think that we're on the right way, but I think that Dr. Castor-Dental is right that we have to do it in such a way where we are still showing our teachers that professional respect that they've earned by being educators that have been to college to become educators to do this job. There's a reason that they have to have certification to do it. You know, I mean, it's such an art form to be able to be a good teacher and to really reach kids. And I'm afraid that if we keep doing the things that we're doing, and if we keep putting them in boxes and scaring them, that we're going to lose all of them. My husband and I were in a cafe, a while back, about a month ago, and we overheard a couple teachers talking about leaving the state of Florida. They're leaving. Right. They're leaving the state of Florida because they don't want to teach in the state anymore.
Right.
And I think as a district that Dr. Castor-Dental is right, that we just have to be brave as we can, do what we can to be the school board members that we have been elected to be and follow the law. That's what we're doing in this policy. It's in the law. Provide support for our teachers the best we can and allow them to be the professionals that they are. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Byrd. Well said. Dr. Vasquez.
Thank you. As far as the process for reviewing books, we have staff and several board members, not just one, that have brought to our attention inappropriate books. And so our staff, when board members bring to our attention concerns, we look into them. And so I want to make it clear that we do not have just one process as to how we review content for being appropriate and inappropriate. If the board asks me not to take board members' considerations and questions into account, then I will follow that direction. Second, I want to be clear. I will not put any employee in a position to lose their certificate. And if that means that I call Tallahassee or Tallahassee calls me to give me guidance, I will continue to do that. Now, if our employees choose not to follow that guidance, I leave that up to them. But I don't think it's fair that we not advocate and provide them with the information they need to continue making their decisions. And we have always communicated with Tallahassee. We've always reached out to them on several topics, not just books or curriculum. We've done it with safety. We've done it with mental health. It's part of what we do. It's supposed to be a partnership. Sadly, recent events have led us to believe that we not always have the right information. But I want everyone to understand the reason we have those conversations is so that our educators, our staff, isn't blindsided, and all of a sudden they're faced with your certificate is being pulled. What decision they choose to make as a result of that is totally up to them. But as a superintendent, I believe it is my responsibility to give them all of the information we have so that they can make an informed decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vasquez. And I personally appreciate that. I think that the point that Member Byrd was making about teachers leaving the state is a reality, but I also firmly believe that the superintendent is correct in making sure that they know when there is a risk of losing their teaching certificate, because I don't want to lose a single teacher from the school district, but I would rather lose a teacher that can go on to teach someplace else than have a teacher lose their teaching certificate. And those are two really bad options to choose from. So I think a lot of board members have expressed, and I just want to close out with, this is a very difficult position for our teachers to be in. And I agree with all the comments that have been made about the professional role they play, the important education that they have had, that few people that are making rules have ever walked in their shoes or have any idea how difficult it is, and that it is not something that can be done effectively through regulation. There's just too much that takes place in the classroom in terms of connectivity, in terms of inspiration. And while I believe there are many good intents to make our classrooms more predictable places, I think that we, as a whole, are underestimating how good our teachers are, how valuable they are, and how much flexibility and freedom they need to continue to be successful. So with that, I think we're ready to move on to our next policy. Ms. Enval, are you in charge?
Can I am.
Yeah.
Well, just for briefly. Can I get clarification on this paragraph that's highlighted in yellow? I know we heard from some school board members they were not comfortable with it. Can I get clarification from the board moving forward whether to keep it or to remove it so that when we do advertise it's there or it's not?
Can you tell us whether that's statutory language?
This is something that we came up, I believe. I have to refer to my teammates here. I believe this is a definition that we came up with based on individual feedback from you all. And so that's kind of, it's not statutory, it's where we came up with it.
Input. Member Gallo?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know the light's so faint. So I would be comfortable with the paragraph, and I know that I initially brought it up, as long as the communication to our staff and the directives that we give to teachers is very clear on what it means so there's no confusion with them. My concern with that paragraph is the confusion that it creates with our educators. So if there's no confusion amongst our educators, I don't have a problem leaving it in, but I'll defer to the rest of the board.
Any other feedback from board members? Member Gould?
I think there's a lot that still needs to be worked out and that we have to kind of continue to flex and respond, because there is, in the statute alone, so much interpretation you have to make, just as you pointed out with the two words. right? So I am not for really putting anything additional in to the policies until we really know where the rules are, because I don't think anybody knows where the rules are because they're being made up as we go.
Member Front.
I'm for keeping this. I think, any additional clarity is great, and I think it's the policy is what we create, but we would, the superintendent is the one who would be taking this and explaining it to the teachers and staff. I think it's fine the way it is.
Does that give you any direction? I don't think so.
It does a little bit. So the first sentence of this particular provision is in the statute. They actually use the phrase mature classroom instruction. The purpose of expanding that so that it made a little bit more sense was so that we had an interpretation to give to our teachers and the public, which is the feedback that we received from you individually. So that was the discussion that we had amongst ourselves as we were adding it in, because I think a lot of you individually spoke to the team there and said, what does mature classroom instruction mean? And because it's not defined by the statute, we wanted to give as much guidance as we possibly could to our teachers. So that's why it's there.
If
I'm still
Member- Huh? All right. Do we have consensus with the board to leave this language in, recognizing that if we get more clarification from the state at some point, we will come back and modify it, but to provide some guidance? Okay, I think we have consensus on that. Thank you.
All right, moving on to policy IJL. The changes are going to actually be, a lot of the discussion that you just had is going to be relevant to IJL, so I think it'll be a little bit easier to go through. We actually contemplated doing IJL first, but here we go. Back to Ms. Kibbe and Mr. Dragon.
Thank you. All right, so IJL, again, is being revised to include language from the recently enacted laws to clarify the process by which a parent or resident of the county can request reconsideration of instructional materials in libraries, and to incorporate language from policies IMB and KEC. And the revisions have been made to the existing policy language to include content formatting and terminology edits consistent with statutory language. I'm going to scroll really fast to get to the right page. At the bottom of page 2, we added some additional language at the request of the individual conversations that we had with school board members to include some more clarity. So the two highlighted sections here were taken directly from the Florida Department of Education's online training materials for library media specialists from slide 7. So any picture, photograph, drawing, sculpture, motion picture, film, video cassette, or similar visual representation or image of a person or portion of the human body which depicts nudity or sexual conduct, sexual excitement, sexual battery, bestiality, or sadomasochistic abuse, and which is harmful to minors, or any book, pamphlet, magazine, printed matter, however reproduced, or sound recording that contains any matter defined in section 847.001 of the Florida statutes, explicit and detailed verbal descriptions or narrative accounts of sexual excitement or sexual conduct, and that is harmful to minors, as additional clear criteria for media specialists to consider.
Members of the board, just for clarity, that's directly out of 847.012. So that's not DOE's language. That's just a straight reproduction of the criminal statute.
Thank you, Mr. Palmerini.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you repeat what you said, Mr. Palmerini?
I said this language is directly out of 847.012, and I heard the question: is this the question? Is this a criminal statute? The answer is yes.
All right. In the next section, when we discuss selecting books and what considerations should be made, the media specialist shall determine whether donated material shall be accepted for inclusion in the collection. This is a sentence that we added after removing another section of the policy that many of the school board members commented on as being redundant. In the challenges to media center materials and other reading materials section, so where we have absorbed KEC, we received feedback from several board members about this preamble here at the top. It introduces procedures, but the procedures don't actually start right here. So we move this preamble to the bottom here where the procedures do actually begin. So it was really more just a formatting change. The following procedures shall be applied when the appropriateness of media center materials or other reading materials is questioned, hereinafter challenged material. This does not apply to state adopted textbooks in use in the classroom. Challenged material shall not be removed immediately. Such material shall be available for student use pending a final decision. From there, it goes into the request for reconsideration process and what that looks like. One of the additional things that we added based on the school board's feedback is this here at the top of page 7. If the superintendent or designee determines the materials contain pornography or material that is harmful to minors or obscene, the superintendent or designee shall permanently remove the material from the collection. Additional changes that were made throughout the policy were minor and a nod to the reorganization that's happening. Instead of using the specific titles, we changed this to say appropriate district level designee rather than the area superintendent, associate superintendent, and or chief of high schools. And you will see that throughout the policy. Chair Jacobs, you brought up earlier the timing constraints. One of the things that we added here is the endeavor to meet within the working days that we have put throughout here, as these working days are not guided by statutes. At the bottom of page 9 for item G, we added additional statutory citations here into the text, and then this determination shall be reviewable after 5 years instead of valid. And we made that change in another section as well. Again, district level designee, district level designee, district level designee, multiple times throughout here. And then once again, the endeavor to meet within a specific time frame. And then additional statutory language added here, and overall referring to the district level designee rather than a specific title. And those are the changes to IJL.
All right. Dr. Castellano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for that update. I have 2 issues. One is a question first with the first thing you talked about. I guess it was further definition of pornography, that one. So on that first highlighted part, when you talk about any picture, photograph, drawing, or sculpture, image of a person or portion of the human body which depicts nudity or sexual conduct. The nudity part, I know that, again, the statue of David is in the news because a principal was fired when a parent complained that their child was exposed to the statue David. Are we including that? Are we preventing our students from seeing anything like that? In art class, high school?
So the last part of the definition is the important part of the definition, which is harmful to minors. Under the statute, it's not harmful to minors. Harmful to minors and obscene is the same definition under Florida law. And the obscenity definition and harmful to minors definition includes, does the work have some artistic merit? And in this case, obviously, it is a classical work of art. So in my opinion, that would not meet the definition of harmful to minors and therefore would not be banned by the statute.
Okay. So to follow up, the key word there in the last line is the word and which is harmful to minors. So can we add which is also harmful to minors? Or make the word and bold so that it is, when someone is reading it, they truly understand that it isn't just a drawing or a classical art, but and which is harmful to minors, that is key.
We have copied this directly from statute, so I would look to Mr. Palmerini and Ms. Enval for advice regarding that.
It's 6 in one and a half dozen of the other. If you want to bold it, you can. If you don't, the words have the same meaning regardless of whether they're bolded or not. But if the board wants to emphasize it, that is certainly a decision the board could make.
I think it adds clarity.
Can I agree with you. Can I get a quick read from the board? Yeah. Yeah, I think that's important.
Underline. Okay, I have a second question. Thank you for that. When it comes to the process for a challenge, you mentioned by a parent and by a community member, but I would also like to put in there some kind of wording about challenge by a board member.
Okay.
Because we do have a process that includes the community challenge, where it starts at the school, and then we have a district review process as well. Then it comes to the board if they appeal. The board will weigh in at one point, but I don't think it's appropriate for a board member to circumvent that process. I think it's a shortcut, and there are other procedures in our district where the board members do not get to weigh in, that we let the staff do that, whether it's procurement, vendors, contracts, and I see this as similar, that we can weigh in later, but I don't think it's appropriate for a board member to launch a challenge or a reconsideration without going through the same process as everyone else. Because why I think that's important is because it needs to be public. When a board member makes that challenge directly to the superintendent, you don't know that. That's behind the scenes, that's not out in the open. And I think anytime we have a challenged book, we need to have a public process, because banning books is not something that we should do lightly or in the dark. There needs to have a community discussion or notification. So I would like to see that a superintendent or a board member also has to follow that same process. That's it.
Comments directly on that? Member Gallo, Vice Chair?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just quickly, Member Castro-Dental was referring to what was in statute that Mr. Palmerini detailed as directly out of statute, the criminal statute. Can we also, since we're pulling and defining what's in statute, can we pull the definition that's in statute of harmful to minors and include it so that when we look at the and, that will now be bold, that harmful is also clearly defined to give more clarification to not only our community but to our educators?
By body language, I think there's a large agreement with that. Mr. Palmerini, or was that a question for Mr. Palmerini, or was that a question for the board?
Unless we just reconsider.
847.001.
Oh, that one.
Yeah, it has both harmful to minors and obscene in the definition statute, 847.001.
So we could copy and paste it into
Yeah.
this policy, but then the issue is if the statute changes, then we'd have to change our policy, but there is a.
Right.
We'd have to change that anyway. We'd have to do that anyway.
We can add a definition section. We'll figure out how to add that in there.
Thankfully, that definition has come from a United States Supreme Court case, so I think the statute will probably continue to track that Supreme Court case as long as it's still good law.
Yeah. Okay. I think Member Castrodeno was looking for feedback on the issue of board members going through the challenge process. Is there feedback on that issue in particular?
I'd like to speak real quick.
Member Farrant?
Because I'm sure you're talking directly to me. Maybe to others as well. Okay. Because I have challenge books. I am one of the ones that brought this up a year and a half ago when I brought up books that were in our schools. This isn't just about, a little, peck on the lips or whatnot. These are books that have, I don't know. Okay. So the issue is, so personally, I have put in challenges, and it goes through the review process, just like a parent, and just like I did when I was a parent. If there is a book, for instance, like Let's Talk About It, that one I did show the superintendent, and I said, hey, I just want to let you know that this is in some of our books. How would you like to proceed? It was, pornographic is exactly what this definition states. So whether you want to believe that or not, doesn't matter to me. I know what the statute says. And so that I did show her, and I asked her, and she took note of it, and she does what she does best. So I think, if we want to put in there that you have to go through a review process, but I don't know any board members who are circumventing that. But we can put that in statute or in the policy.
While we're still on that subject, if I can speak to that, because actually it ties in with the one comment I was going to make, and that is that we have this language here as number 2, and then at the bottom, I think we have like a D or an E. Scroll down to the bottom. We say the material is going to stay in circulation. And then later on, we say, if the superintendent or designee determines the material contains pornography or material that is harmful, it shall permanently remove the material. So my understanding of this is the first part says it's going to stay on the shelf till it goes through the process. This part, I thought the purpose of this is that if the superintendent, without it going through a lengthy process, sees the material and says, okay, stop, hang on, we have a problem, this violates statute, it's not going to stay on the shelves. Is that the intent of this language? Okay. If that's the intent of this language, I think, I mentioned this last time, I think the placement of it is, if not improper, not as clear as it could be if it were addressed at the beginning, because we make a statement, it's going to stay on the shelves. And then if you read all the rest of this, you find out that it might not stay on the shelves. And I just think that the part where the superintendent may pull it immediately needs to follow right after it will stay on the shelves unless. I think then people understand that the superintendent does have the authority, if she sees something that she believes violates the law, to take it off the shelves immediately. Having said that, if we reach that agreement that it needs to be more clear what the superintendent's authority is, then that would also apply to a board member going through the process. Board members going through the process, anything that's going through the process that rises to the superintendent's attention and is, in her opinion, clearly in violation and doesn't need to go through the process, or could go through the process but needs to be removed, to be cautious that the state does not realize that we've had a book on the shelves for 6 months as we go through this process, while the superintendent already knows it's improper. So I think that would satisfy, some concern, as long as we are abundantly clear that the superintendent can circumvent the process to protect us and protect our students, protect us from being in compliant with the law and protect our students from being exposed to material they're not supposed to. So that was in response to that issue. Member Gould on that issue. And then I promise I'm going to get back into the cycle here.
So, first of all, I like the idea of putting the school board member in the definition, because I think it lends to the transparency that we want this board to be perceived with. So I like that thought. On what you just said, I do think that the superintendent, because she is qualified to understand what is developmentally appropriate and what the curriculum is, I do support that, but I'm not sure that even she should be able to randomly circumvent that public process that Member Castrodental was talking about. So even if she pulls it, I would want to make sure it still follows all of those other steps and it's ratified that, yes, that was the right decision, and she made that decision because it was not age appropriate developmentally, or it met she thought, she was sure it met the definition of the pornography that we've just put into this policy.
For clarification, just to make sure I understand your point, superintendent would have the ability to pull it immediately. It would still go through the process to ratify or reject her recommendation.
Correct.
Okay.
So that it is always, the public always has that ability to know what books are and are not being pulled.
But ultimately, that process ends and it does come back. It ultimately could come to the board.
It does, but if you shorten it and she just pulls it,
No, I
then that goes back to the opportunity Member Castrodental was talking about. I do think there are things that pop up, as they did most recently, that need, in our collective understanding, that book may not have been in the right appropriate area. So, but it doesn't mean that book shouldn't see the light of day again. Even if it never goes back on our shelves, it should have that same process and public scrutiny opportunity.
Thank you. Just wanted a clarification on your perspective. Member Gallo.
Thank you. Oh, I'm having trouble with this mic today. So I agree with, just to circle back with Member Gould, I think that it's extremely appropriate for the superintendent to pull books that should have never been in our library out of our library immediately so that we could follow law. Once that happens, and I've been honest, there's been some books that we have pulled that I 100% agree with that were not appropriate to be in our libraries, but there needs to be there needs to be a process. So for transparency's sake, so that the community could have input, that it could truly be vetted. Once we pull it for content, it should still go through the channels that was mentioned. That's just, it's kind of like checks and balances, and more importantly, as Member Gould mentioned, for transparency's sake, we always want to be able to give the community the opportunity to have a discussion, to let us know where they stand, and to be transparent about what we're pulling. I understand that everything that we pulled, we have to send to the Department of Education, so it's available for everybody to see, but they shouldn't have to go looking for it. We should let them know what we're pulling. So I support that process, and I am concerned with things that we're dealing with in Orange County. And I know that we have pre-agenda, but pre-agenda is very prescribed, and it's only 30 minutes. And when there's a topic that the community really, really wants to discuss, we don't really give them the opportunity to do so. And this is kind of, I think this is germane to the conversation that we're having. And I'll tell you why. We as a board talk a lot about transparency and about community involvement and the need for us to be as clear as possible. And when things come up that happened last week, or things like we're removing a book, we need to give the opportunity for the community to input. And right now, that only looks like 30 minutes during pre-agenda because it's not going to be on our agenda. So how do we, with fidelity, make sure that we're hearing from the community as a board as a whole? How do we give them more than 30 minutes to discuss with us things that are happening in our community that they are either happy with or not happy with, so that we can hear from our community? Does that look like we create a new policy where maybe as a board, a majority of the board, we can add something to the agenda that maybe we're not voting on that would still allow the public to come and discuss it with us? It would still have to be my majority. Maybe it looks like a different policy, but I think as a board, we need to figure out a way that we can hear more from the community, because with everything that's going on right now, with all these laws that are being passed, we're confused, they're confused, and we need to make sure that we hear from the public now more than ever. So I don't know, I know this isn't a discussion for now, but I would like to challenge the superintendent and the board to come up with a way that we're hearing from them more than just 30 minutes on a pre-agenda.
All right.
I do have some.
Should I circle back around with everybody else and come back to you? Okay. Member Farrant, and then Member Salamanca.
Okay, so page 3. All right, so 3, 7. Okay, for donated material, are we keeping a record of who donated and when? And maybe that's something more of a procedural, but is that something that we need to have in policy that states we're keeping a record of that?
Madam Chair.
I'm sorry, Superintendent, you're recognized. Thank you.
Are you speaking, I'm sorry, specifically to books or?
Well, yes, just because this is the library material policy where it's saying determine whether donated material shall be accepted for inclusion in the collection. Are we keeping a record of who's donating and when? I think maybe can we have something in our policy that would state, or something that would direct then for that? Because I know the public is going to want to know, if we're doing transparency, then who exactly is donating that?
So a couple of thoughts on that. So that to me is more procedural, so maybe not in a policy.
Okay.
But again, I just want to, I'm not disagreeing or agreeing, but now we're putting more on the teacher who's receiving donated materials, or the school principal, to then keep track of when and who donated them. So I will follow the direction of the board, but I do think it's more procedural.
Maybe
and
even
not
just
in
a form
policy.
that if somebody wants to donate, they got to fill it out, and they keep that in their file. The other thing was on page 9, E2. I have on my notes here. E2. Okay, do we have, if we're going to add the endeavor to, is that just for, what was the point of doing that?
That was to the point that Chair Jacobs was making earlier, in case of natural disaster or other extenuating circumstances where we wouldn't be able to, for sure, be able to meet within those 15 working days, that we would do our absolute best to do so.
Do we need to have something then in there that says, but, within 15 days, but no later than? Because otherwise, it could drag on for weeks and weeks, like what happened with, for me, genderqueer, that took 1.5 years for something to come about. But I think we need to have something where there's more of a specific, that's it.
Well, since I raised it, is it all right with the board if I respond? One of the concerns that I had is if we are heading into the summer and people have vacation schedules and we suddenly are unable to have a quorum in 15 days. And so while I'd like to have a definitive time frame, if they try another 15 days and they still don't have a quorum, I think we would either have to have some language in there that allows us to lower the quorum, or has language like endeavor that doesn't force our hand to do something in 15 days that we literally may not be able to do. We just can't force people to come to a meeting. So that was the reason I had that concern, because this is a committee made up of individuals who aren't, necessarily working for the district, and it could be during summer when they're not on duty. So that was the reason for putting more broad language. Okay. All right. Member Salamanca.
Thank you, Chair. I think I wanted to back Gallo and Member Gold's concern, making sure that the process for anyone that removes for whether or challenges at the board or at the superintendent level goes through the same process of transparency. I think it makes perfect sense for things to be temporarily removed when they're brought up and challenged. And I understand that there's a lot of attention in this topic, particularly that we get from the media as well as the Department of Education when these books come up. But there's a difference between temporarily removing and permanently removing something. And I think that should meet the threshold of a transparent process where the public gets input. So just expressing my support there. And the other one was, I made note of this. I was going to back the adding the definition of harmful as well. So if that would be really helpful if we could add that in here as well. And yep, that would be all. I think we get a lot of Gallo's point about public input and generally creating a more space for that. I think what has been really challenging is when something like what happened last week occurs, all of us get emails from different sides. But just because a parent sent us an email doesn't mean that they represent the entire community. And I think it's really hard as a board member and as the representative of my district to scope out really where the majority of people are feeling. And that can be very difficult when it's just a few that send emails. And I think an additional forum for folks to come and communicate and community leaders to come and word their community concerns would be really helpful. I guess the other thing about this policies is there are some counties in the district that are having an upward number of 300 books being challenged on any given month. And so I don't know that maybe the policy discussion is the right way to go, but I think there is a discussion to be had at the board on at what point is too many books too much for us to be okay being off the bookshelves of our students. And is there an expedited process or committee for when X amount of books are on hold? Because it becomes it's the difference between having 1 and 2 books on hold that we are waiting 15 a whole summer to discuss. But I'm afraid that if what's happening in other counties where we have 300, 500 books being questioned at the same time, that timeline might be a little bit more important to expedite. So just a thought. Thank you.
Dr. Vasquez, did you want to respond directly to that?
I wanted to comment that I understand and I am wholeheartedly in agreement. And actually when we do look at a book, it's been asked, the district team looks at the content and makes a recommendation. But I believe 6-8 weeks ago, staff might be able to correct me if I'm wrong, DOE came out with, 4 books that they said were pornography. And so is the board expecting us to also go through the challenge process when the Department of Education is stating the books contain pornography and should be removed? That was my point.
Okay. I know. I'm just trying to think. I have the whole board is lit up for totally different reasons. Nobody's expecting that question right now. But those of you who are signed up to speak, I'm going to take you in the order we're in, and then we'll come back. I'll leave you there. I just want an answer on that, and then we'll come back to what issue you wanted to discuss. Are we okay? Member Felder, you're first up.
Thank you. Yeah, I was going to talk about something else, but when you said that, okay.
Okay, we're just on that right now.
No, okay, so we do have a planning meeting scheduled. The chair has a schedule next week. And to your concern, Member Gallo, I think in that meeting, we should use that time to talk about this whole idea of transparency, and I'm in agreement. We have so many issues going on, and these people, the people that elected us, they elected us to be their voice and an advocate, and we in turn must allow them to have a voice. So I think we'll have an opportunity in that planning meeting to discuss, that desire to the extra time and so forth. But I think because of the times in which we're living and what occurred on last week, we must have this discussion. We must, as a board, have this discussion, and we must come up with a policy to address these issues that are plaguing the members of our constituency. Now, I just wanted to sort of add my 2 cents, for lack of a better term. This book challenge, that's a lot. And I don't want us to turn into a dictatorship, but it does take a lot. So we're going to have to, Superintendent, really look at how we deal with the book challenges that are being taken away, because I know I don't want pornography taught on any level. I think that's a mom and daddy's position to do that. However, I do know that we're living in ever-changing society, and life is full of swift transitions. So we have to address that. But I just wanted to add that I am in agreement. I think Member Gallo suggested that. We do need to reconsider how we handle allowing the public to share their input, whether we agree or disagree. We must allow them that time to share. All right, that's all I want to say for right now.
So I need to come back, though, to the question the superintendent asked. And her question was, Department of Ed has identified 4 books that they have determined are pornographic, and therefore either pornographic or harmful to children, and harmful, and some not permitted, period. The question the superintendent had was, is she supposed to honor that, pull the books off the shelf, or is this board expecting it to go through the process that we have in our policy? Is that your question?
It is, and I want to make a point of clarification. Our website is up, so at any book that is removed for pornography or inappropriateness will be posted, and currently the ones that we've pulled off the shelf are listed on there. So as far as transparency and people knowing what we've pulled, that would be part of that.
All right, so Member Felder, can you answer that question with a yes or no answer?
Okay.
And if you can't, that's fine.
Wait a minute. You said whether or not you should make a decision of the board. Is that the question?
My question is, if the example I gave, DOE came out with a list of, or came out with 4 books that they said pornography and should be removed, or it may have said they had been removed. My question to the board is, at that point, do we pull them off the shelf and go through the process and then wait till what the committees say about the pornography in that book, or do we deem that DOE has made a determination that it's pornography and we just pull them off the book and post it on our website?
All right, okay. I can't give a yes or no because...
That's fine. That's fine. I'm not sure that everybody can give a yes
I can't give a yes or no because let me tell you why. Because as a board, we're in charge of policy. And the DOE, the Department of Education has set out policies that we as a board support. But the superintendent also looks to us as a board to support whatever it is decisions she makes. And if it is in policy for us to do that. So I can't give you a yes or no, but I do think I can say this. discussion needs to be made before any decision. I think there needs to be some discussion. I do. Thank you.
Okay. Member Casterdello. Oh, I'm sorry, Member Gallo. I'm looking, I'm thinking she's up number 1, so now we're on number 2. She's not there. Go ahead, Member Gallo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I would say that, do you know offhand which 4 books they are?
Does it matter?
No. Okay, I would say that if the Department of Education has deemed them to be pornographic, we have no choice but to remove them, and they really don't need to go through the process. I think putting them through the process is what's the point? At the end of the day, they're still going to have to be removed from our libraries because the Department of Education is telling us they have to. So why put our people through the extra work when they're already overburdened of that process when the end result will be the same?
Okay, Member Casterdello.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to go in the order that I have notes written, I agree.
Can we answer that one and we'll come back and I'll come back to you, I promise.
Well, sure. So my thought, it sounds, kind of like it's not a big deal when it's just 4 books. But what happens when the DOE gives out a list of 500 books to pull? So I don't think that they're the ones that determine whether our books are on the shelf or not. I think the fact that they have been deemed inappropriate can be part of the discussion that the committees have. But I don't think we want to put that in policy or necessarily automatically remove them because we don't know what's going to happen in the future. And I'm not just making a wild prediction. I think it's actually possible that they would come out with a long list of books that someone in the DOE deems inappropriate. And I don't know if our standards are the same as theirs. So I don't think it should be an automatic book removal.
Thank you, Member Casterdello. And I'm leaving you up here to come back around on the other issues. Member Gould?
So I think we need to treat this differently. I think any of the books that are pulled by the DOE need to be designated that on the list that is on our website, that it was a state-level decision. I also think that we have to give the community the right to have a discussion about those books. And I don't know that putting it through the current process is that discussion point, but there needs to be a point where that feedback can be shared, and we have an obligation to share it with the DOE, good, bad, indifferent. So that's, and I know it's more burdensome, but again, if we want the community to have input, even if we can't change the outcome in some cases, I think we need to be that feedback mechanism and that sounding board.
Okay. Similar thoughts to Member Gould. I think, and I'm hoping I have Ms. Emball's attention as well, because it could be a legal question. I think if we go through the process, knowing that that process ends with it coming to the board. Well, first of all, I do think it should come off the shelf immediately. I like the idea of having some way of putting that in front of the public. I'm not sure that going through this practice is the right one, because at the end of the day, a lot of people are going to spend a lot of time, and it's going to ultimately come to the board, and I think the board is not going to have a way of doing anything except for removing it. I'm a little unclear about whether DOE has the rulemaking authority here to govern this area, but I also know from not too recent experience that if they don't, they will very, very quickly. So I think we need to assume that they have that authority. By bringing the public to the table, if it reaches the point where it is not pornography, but it is wandering into a different area that let's say hypothetically, most people would not see as pornography or harmful to students, by having some sort of, maybe it is a town hall type of process, but some way of making the community aware and bringing them into that. If somebody wishes to advocate for a change at the state level or challenge those decisions, the public has that opportunity some of the opportunities that we don't have. And I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm just trying, as Member Castor-Dental was looking down into the future and thinking of an extreme scenario, I think we should anticipate what would we do in that scenario. So kind of taking a little bit of everything I've heard, but I like that that idea for that reason. Let me go to, was that clear?
That was clear. I think I can chime in right now. So, I mean, the DOE does have the ability to oversee public education. Sorry. And with that, in fact, I certainly value the time that could be spent on some of that kind of thing. I understand the receiving input from the public and that kind of thing, but I don't think it would change anything that you are all doing, because the DOE will tell us that, and that would be something that you would want to follow. And probably Mr. Palmerini will go ahead and expound upon that.
Mr. Palmerini?
Article 9, Section 2 of the Florida Constitution.
With the specific statutory citation.
The State Board of Education shall be a body corporate and have such supervision of the system of free public education as is provided in law. So when they make a law, they have the supervisory right to say, we are determining this book is pornographic. We are directing you to remove it from the shelf. They have that statutory and constitutional authority.
All right. So you're saying that the statute does provide that oversight in this area?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Member Farran. And again, I'm keeping everybody's name in the order they were in. Member Farran. Do you remember the question? I heard somebody say, what is the question?
No, I said
okay.
That wasn't.
Okay.
I hate when you called. I'm like, wait, did I push the button? No, I was just going to be in agreement with that I think we have to listen to DOE, and whether there's 1 or 100 books. Unfortunately, things have gone unchecked for so long that there are quite a few books in our schools that do need to get looked at. And so I am in agreement. I think we need to remove those books, and that we would make that clear that it's on the website, and it would say removed per orders from Tallahassee, DOE.
Member Salamanca.
Thank you, Chair. I think similar to the point you made earlier, Dr. Vasquez, I think we all stand pretty steady that we don't want anyone losing their certification because of books or materials or anything that should not be there based on what the DOE says. So I am supportive of the minute the DOE says there's a list of books, we should remove them. But I am supportive of making sure that we gather the feedback on those books from our community. I think it is coming out of the zoning process and my learnings from that, it makes a huge difference when we have pages on pages of feedback from the community supporting or not supporting something that we can, 1, have, 2, send up to DOE, whether they read it or not, but also making it clear on our website what are those books that have been challenged by our community versus by the state, and just redirecting. There is a point when emailing us after a book has been removed by DOE, we can't do anything once that has happened, right? They should redirect a lot of those comments to their House representative, their senators, their governor. And so I do think we play a little bit of a role in triaging and making it clear to the public when we remove a book, and who, we as a board stand by that decision and send the comments to us. But if the DOE is the one that removes a book, direct your comments to them. And we can gather a lot of that feedback too and share with them. But I think it's really important for the public to have transparency, because I don't think they usually will know the difference. And a lot of that always falls on us anyway.
Thank you, Member Salamanca. Ms. Emble, I have you down. I don't think you want to speak right now. Well, let me take Member Byrd.
Yep.
Member Byrd.
I agree with everything that Member Salamanca just said. So there you go.
All right. Ms. Emble, did you want to summarize to make sure you're?
I would like to, yes. I would make sure that the team and I are clear that we're safe. Okay, so what I heard with respect to policy IJL is that we're going to add in the "and" to the like Dr. Castrodental said. We are going to add in definitions from the Florida statutes with respect to harmful to minors and obscene. We are going to have the books that the superintendent pulls that comes to her attention go through the process to ratify or reject. We're going to add that somewhere in policy. And then we're going to carve out an exception for the DOE, say that those are going to be pulled, but they're going to be separately. I don't know if necessarily it needs to be like in the policy, although I think it should be somewhere. We'll just figure it out how to do it. But with respect to on the website, our process, have those designated between what were pulled by the district and then what were pulled by DOE. That capture everything?
The one thing I asked for, I don't think there was objection, is moving the top
Yes.
of page 7,
Yep.
that language up, so it comes right under number 2 as a however. However, this language will change a little bit based on what we just discussed, because we're saying the superintendent shall permanently remove the material, and what I am hearing is the superintendent will remove it, but it may not be permanent.
Yes.
Okay?
Yep. Sorry. I forgot to star that one, but
Member Castrodental.
Thank you, Madam.
No, I'm sorry. Did you just want to comment on that? Because
Yes.
I got this circling around and I just got slapped.
Yes, it's about.
It was just a gentle little
Miss
tap on
Emble.
the. Yeah. It wasn't, wasn't a closed fist across the, no.
This is
Okay.
about including all the notes. I didn't hear anything about a board member having to go through that. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good catch. Okay, Vice Chair Gallo.
I just want to say that I agree with the comments made about removing the books and then making sure that the community has an ability to communicate to the board, and we can share that information. So I think that this has been covered already, but I'm going to circle back just because we've kind of been all over the place up here. So with that being said, I first have to say thank you to the team for all the work that they've done on this policy, because it's been, I think, almost a year in the making. Is that correct? Like, I think we've been working on it for a year.
Yes.
And there's been a lot of input from the board, and we give you input, and then we come up here and we question the input that we gave you to add to the policy. And I just want you to know that we recognize that. And so thank you for your flexibility and your kindness, and for all the hard work that you've done, and for listening as intently as you did to the board. We so appreciate it, and I know we made this difficult on you, and for that I apologize. But it's really important that we get it right.
Yeah.
So on number 2, we talked about, I know this was discussed, but we talked about the challenge materials shall not be removed. They shall be available to the student use pending final decision. Are we just talking about the textbooks that are challenged in that sentence, or all challenged books?
No, this is specific to library media books. So this challenge process, and I guess books in classroom libraries, but this process does not apply to state adopted textbooks. This is just for library media materials.
So any book that is challenged will remain on the shelf until after the challenge process goes through?
That is how it is written here.
Shouldn't it be like an asterisk with unless the superintendent pulls it?
Yes, and that is the language that will be moved.
Okay, that's what you were
Yes.
thinking. Okay,
Yes.
perfect. And then, and we already discussed district-wide and taking input from the community. Again, I think we do need to find time to make sure that we're hearing from the community on all issues, not just on books. And then finally, that is it. I just want to say thank you, and I already did, so thanks.
Okay, wonderful. Member Castrodental.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to weigh in briefly about expanding the community forum input when there is a need. I agree with that. When it comes to donating of books and writing the donors or including the names of donors, I see that as almost unnecessary and difficult to actually implement. I think as a teacher, I would have students who would donate the books after they read them to my library. I would have people from the community drop off a box of books. We didn't know who they were. We would have parents buy books during our scholastic book fairs, and I didn't always know who those parents were. So I think that is going to be a difficult task, and I'm not sure how necessary, although I understand the desire to be as transparent as possible. I'm not as sure that it's as important to know who donated the books, and it would be difficult to figure out. An area that I don't think was addressed in the policy that I think we need to think about just when we're looking at what's happened in other districts in the state is the idea of a mass challenge. Because I know that there have been districts where someone challenged 300 books at a time, and that's just not practical. That's overwhelms our system. It's kind of an abuse of the system as well. I think if we were to consider putting some limits on how many challenges an individual may make at a time, we don't prevent them from, ever having a lifetime limit of challenges, but at a time, maybe we say no more than 3 challenges. Until those have gone through the process, you can't challenge any others. Until then, it's a way to make sure that our people and our staff are not being overwhelmed and abused by this process. And I'd be interested to hear what my fellow board members think about putting some guardrails in. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Castrodental. Member Gould, you happen to be up next. Do you want to respond to that? And then what other comments? And then we'll work our way around.
With my other comments or
Let's get it all out. Get it all out.
Get it all. It's a short list anyway. So I'll respond to that first. I don't know what that mechanism is if we are assaulted with, a list of 300 books, but if there's a way to sift and prioritize them in some way that it maybe have been on the reading curriculum in the past, but they're not currently, but they're being shelved, maybe there is a process that makes it easier to sift through them, but I don't have a solution, but I agree that it probably could clog up the process and then hurt if a book does slip through that may not be age appropriate because it's way down at the bottom of the priority list, because if they take them in order, that's a different story. So I agree it's an issue, but I don't have a solution or a suggestion for that. I did want to also follow up on the donation of books. I'm not clear on how, when we're talking about the books themselves, being the transparency portion, why it matters where they came from. And my concern is, in my community, I have a lot of organizations, including Rotaries, including Observer Media, the hospital, that do book drives on behalf of them. They don't know who gives the book because it's a box and people drop the book in. We would never know out of the hundreds of books who that donor was, nor does it affect the review of the book. So I'm not sure it's that additional, excuse the term, but bureaucracy is giving any further transparency, because we're always going to review a book. We can't, even if we think think somebody's giving books constantly that they shouldn't give, it's still got to go through the review process. It can't be stopped and say, oh, well, you gave a bad book last time, so we're not going to take this book this time because it's probably a bad book. They still have to go through the review process in order for it to be transparent in the community. So I think it may put a burden and discourage people, and we still have a budgetary problem and don't have enough books to lift literacy. So I'm concerned that it would stifle many good intentions and good resources. That's my concern about it.
Thank you. Question was, what was the question? I'm sorry. 300, yes, thank you. Okay, after what I have seen with public records requests, I can imagine a situation like that, and I think it is a good idea that you've brought forward that hopefully it doesn't happen, that we have a procedure. And that brings us back to that idea that something has to move forward in 15 days or whichever that was. Another great example of why that might not happen. I think, I'm not sure if we're ready to know what that looks like, but I think that at a minimum we should ask people that submit more than a certain number or more than one, that they prioritize which ones they think, and that we determine a way if one person has 300 and two or three people come in with 100. Are we doing the 300? Is it first come, first serve? A little more thought than we can get into now. And it may not be that it needs to be in policy. It may be that policy directs us to establish a process. So, which we would have input into what that process is, but wouldn't bind us to having to know all the answers right now. So how does the board feel about that? Putting into the policy that the superintendent shall come back to the board with guidelines. It's just a directive. It could just be a directive. Yes, go ahead, please.
So I would and I'm fine with whatever the board decides. I understand the need for guardrails so that we don't overburden, overtax our staff or even the board. I would take note, though, that the process for which we challenge a book, the form that's in place that they have to fill out, is lengthy in nature. It's like 2 or 3 pages. So it would take somebody a tremendous amount of time to fill up that form for 100 books or 300 books. So to get them, they would, I guess you could, right? You could. So I do support it, but I just want to know that I'm what we have in policy, what we require for someone to challenge the book, we do ask for a lot of information. Like, you can't just willy-nilly hand us a list of 100 books and say, okay, I want to challenge these. You've got to tell us why you want to challenge them. You've got to tell us what page it's on that you find conflict with the book, what rule that's kind of breaking within that form. So there are some guardrails within the form, but I understand maybe the need for more guardrails.
So I think we're about done on this, and we need to take a break for lunch. Ms. Emval, if you could just give some thought to whether or not we should have some language in the policy that identifies that there may be a process by which we determine which order we're taking challenges. Okay.
Could we just get through KEC really quickly, because that's the quickest one, and then we have a break? It's like literally 2 seconds.
Yes.
Maybe 2 minutes.
Okay. Mic's off.
All right, KEC, Challenge Materials Policy. This policy is being recommended for repeal since it is being incorporated into policy IJL. I have one more slide for you. The Florida Department of Education's library media training, people have taken it. It guides collection development policies for library media specialists and the selection and maintenance of library media materials for library media specialists. And in case you were curious, 179 of our 181 media specialists have completed the training. The 2 who have not are out on leave due to some extenuating circumstances. So we're doing great, 179 completions.
Member Casterdental, did you wish to speak?
I have a quick comment. It didn't necessarily fall on the others, but the language of challenging a book, we also refer to it as reconsideration. I'm not sure that that's as obvious to people who, I don't know, those terms aren't always obvious, that they're interchangeable.
Okay.
Just a thought.
Okay. Okay. I just learned that lunch does not arrive till 1:15. So we're going to keep pushing on through. We have one more.
But can I make sure that you don't have any concerns with KEC being incorporated into IJL?
Anybody have any concerns?
Nope.
I wasn't going to beg for them.
Okay.
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 Nothing lit up, so I was feeling good. Okay. All right, let's move on.
Okay, we're moving on to the rule development workshop portion of today's meeting. This is going to be considering these three policies: policy EBB, IA, JIC, and the Code of Student Conduct. They followed the following advertisements and publishing date. So they were all advertised on March 8th of 2023. Rule development workshop is scheduled for today, March 28th, 23, with a school board meeting date of April 11th, 2023. And they have all been sent to the union. So first up is policy EBB. I was trying to talk so they could actually go through. We're not doing a formal presentation, but I have staff that's ready here to discuss because you already have heard all these in the work session. Policy EBB, is the school safety specialist. Remember, we added the school board's intent for the school safety specialist to be an OCPS district police law enforcement officer. We added the provision that within 24 hours or as soon as practical thereafter, they had to the school safety specialist had to notify the superintendent or designate about any notice of suspected deficiency received from the Office of Safe Schools. We specifically incorporated language to call the OCPS District Police Communications Center with the phone number that when charter schools and district schools do not have a safe school officer present on campus for coverage. And we changed this section there to reflect the proper statute 1006.112. And then we also included language in Section 6, Notice of Noncompliance, that says outlined in Section 5 of this policy, the school safety specialist must notify the Office of Safe Schools within 24 hours of any deficiencies relating to safe school officer coverage and any instance of noncompliance that is determined to be an imminent threat to the health, safety, or welfare of students or staff. And we also added the line revised at the bottom of the policy. And so staff is here to answer any questions you may have, but we are at the Rule Development Workshop portion. We have already gone to work session on these policies.
Okay. Any input at this point in time? All right, and the next step on this is a public hearing?
Yes. When we also, for the record, we did not have any public people that wanted to provide input during this rule development workshop. Okay. This is scheduled for a school board meeting final approval on April 11th, at which the public will have the second opportunity to provide input into the proposed revisions to policy EBB, which is Accident Prevention and Safety Program.
All right. We have no comments from board members, so we can move on.
All right. Moving on to policy IA.
Yeah. Great presentation. Whoa.
Good job, Counselor.
Oh, yeah.
Other people, we didn't thank them.
Yeah.
They were great. We didn't thank them, did you?
Well, collectively, we didn't.
Okay,
But they know. They got our hearts.
because they sat here for hours with us.
Mm-hmm.
And what
Yeah, you did. Your point was good.
You said after we've already put it in, and we come back and question what we say.
Why'd you put that in there?
But she's right.
You're right.
Change our lives.
Mm-hmm.
We're finicky buttons.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay,
You
we're ready. Policy IA is your student progression plan, and the procedural history that I previously recited for policy EBB is the same for this policy. Based on your input at the February 21st, 2023 work session, the few changes that are made to policy IA that are reflected in the red line that's on BoardDocs. Essentially, in elementary, middle, and high school sections, we have added compulsory school attendance. We added a reference to board policy JE. For additional information as the board directed. That's page 12, 41, and 91. In the middle school section, we removed a section that was related to graduation because it only applies to high school students. Removed in the required curriculum section under the middle school section, which is on page 46, we removed a rule reference that's outdated. And on page 74, under procedures for maintenance and transfer of student records, we removed a rule reference that was outdated. In the high school section, timed myself out. In the high school student, we removed a rule section that was outdated on page 138. On page 156 in the exceptional student education staffing, we removed a rule reference that's outdated. In the requirements for a standard diploma for students with disabilities via access points, we removed the requirement that a waiver of the results of a statewide standardized assessment is subject to verification for appropriateness by an independent reviewer selected by the parent guardian as provided in section 1003.572 Florida statutes, as that reference is to private instructional personnel, and section 1008.22 Florida statutes does not require the approval or verification of appropriateness in order to grant the waiver to the students, and that's on page 159. Some of the other general requirements for special diploma for students with disabilities entering the 9th grade from in 2013 to 14 in prior years. The majority of that section on page 164 to 165 was removed, but there was one portion we were verifying with ESE that could also be removed. And that section discussed students who are pursuing a special diploma progressing through phase A and phase B, and that was removed in its entirety as it no longer in statute. Page 165, under the certificate of completion for students with disabilities, we removed a rule reference that is outdated. And finally, under the waiver of statewide standardized assessments and end of course assessments, we changed may to shall in the following sentence. A student with disability as defined in section 1007.02 Florida statutes for whom the individual education plan team determines that the statewide standardized assessments or end of course assessments cannot accurately measure the student's abilities, taking into consideration all allowable accommodations, shall have assessment results waived in accordance with section 1008.22 3C2 Florida statutes for the purpose of receiving a course grade as a standard high school diploma. And it was the shall that changed, and that was page 165. And these are all things that we went over with you at the work session. And so they are here. We do not, for the record, we do not have any members of the public that have appeared in person or telephonically for input. And so that goes back to you to follow the same thing. This will come for you for final school board approval on April 11th, which will provide the public the second opportunity to provide comment on the proposed revisions.
All right, thank you, Ms. Enval. I have one item that I would like for us to consider adding, but not at this time, because I think we need to adopt this and potentially bring it back if there's support from the board. So, and I think most board members heard from Ms. Angstadt, who comes to our meetings, writes to us frequently, and often has very valuable information to share and great stories about her students that I always love reading about. But in this particular case, the question was, in this policy, the principal makes the final decision on retention. And Ms. Engstadt had raised the issue that a child retained twice has a significantly lower chance of going on to graduate, and that perhaps we should require that the decision to retain a student be moved up higher to the area administrator. And I did have a conversation with Dr. Vasquez on this yesterday, and I think Dr. Vasquez had mentioned to me that, you know, in third grade, this is out of our hands. So obviously, we wouldn't be talking about where the state has dictated otherwise. Again, I'm not suggesting we make a change now, but I wanted to get some semblance of, is the board interested in enough to come back and have a follow-up discussion or a work session on it. So let's begin with, pardon me? Oh, Dr. Vasquez.
Yeah, I do want to make a point of clarification. Yeah. This would only apply to elementary, because in middle and high school, statute addresses having to attain a certain number of credit or completion of courses. So it's only elementary.
Thank you for clarifying that. So, Member Vice Chair, did you want to speak to this? Okay, please.
I think that it's a good idea, and I would like to add to that the question of the parents. I know that a lot of times the parents who know their children best wish to have them retained in kindergarten because they know that they're not either socially ready, academically ready, and that's less harmful to a child, or even in pre-K, although we don't control a pre-K, prior to third grade. So I just want to make sure if we're going to review this, which I'm in favor of, that we also look into that aspect that the parent, because parents have asked to retain their children before and been told flat out, no, we're not retaining your child. We can't. And I get that. You want to progress a child if the child's ability to progress. But I just want to emphasize the importance of having that conversation in conjunction with the parents as that decision is being made.
All right, thank you. Member Gould.
I was going to say something similar, and that if we've identified a child that may be moving forward for other reasons, but and I know we do this already, but how do we really boost up interventions to help them succeed earlier? And I know there's a bill right now being looked at for year-round school, which personally I don't think is a great idea for blanket, but I do think we need an opportunity for students, and it's especially for our lower level learners. And that doesn't mean bring them in and try to teach them the same way, but try to find other innovative ways to make that learning more experiential so they grasp it and get over that hurdle of whatever is that roadblock for them in that area. So I do think it behooves more conversation. It may even be a separate policy and placeholder than within here, because it may need a whole other vantage point. And I would also, as part of that discussion, like to learn where we've had successes, where we've had a lot of resource, such as in our at-risk schools and those who have been on the list, where we have had that interventive successes, because we've had the financial wherewithal to really make the investment that we needed to make in the right teachers in the right place.
Thank you. Let me also mention, when we're talking about parents' input, it made me think about my own situation. My firstborn was born August 31st, and so it was right on the cusp of the cutoff. And then my twins were born August 12th, and they were a boy and a girl. And boys and girls often progress at different rates. And out of an abundance of concern that one of my children might need to be held back and one go forward, for that reason, I held them both back. I didn't have any, there wasn't anything about either one of them that made me think that might happen, but they were so close to that cutoff that I didn't think that age difference was going to affect them when they were in high school or middle school. So I think another, not that it goes into policy, but another consideration I would expect would be, what is their age, or where is that breakdown? Because if they're right on the cutoff and it's early, probably no impact at all. I mean, the fact that my kids were 18 days, I don't think I broke a law on that. And if I did, I think it was I was going to say maybe it was another state, but that'd be lying. It was here, come to think of it. But anyway, it didn't hurt them at all, and I'm glad I did it. But I think that's a consideration for parents as well. So if there's enough interest, we will schedule this to come back. And Ms. Enval, can you give us a rough date of when we could bring this back?
I can. So with respect to this particular policy, it's our recommendation to move forward. This is for the 22-23 school year. Over the summer, the team is taking on an enormous task of revamping and reevaluating this policy, because I think it's 163 pages. It is crazy. It is filled with a lot of duplicative information, and so the team is tasked with making it a little bit more user-friendly. I remember the board had suggested like a website where you can watch the progression and that kind of thing. So we're contemplating all of those things, and we also contemplate that this policy would be kind of track like policy JIC and your code of student conduct, where we actually start looking at it at the beginning of the year of each calendar year, so that the revisions can be made and they're ready and already implemented for the beginning of each school year. At this time, we're a little bit behind with policy IA because it's it's this particular school year. So I think the team can consider that input that you just provided as they're doing it. But the thought is to revamp this and make it a little more user-friendly and easy to follow.
So I know this is for the upcoming year.
This is for this current year.
Right.
Right.
But in order for this to be effective for any retention decisions in the next school year, we would need to bring this back to us sometime.
Yes, the plan is for the team to start looking at it now to revamp everything and bringing it back to you like over the summer, I think.
Over this summer.
Is the plan, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
I just didn't want it to get
No.
lost.
We want to kind of run this concurrently with JIC, the code, so that it's evaluated each year.
Very good. Any other comments on this? If not, I think we're still 8 minutes away from lunch.
Oh, we have
Plow
one more
through.
policy anyway. We have policy JIC and the code of student conduct. And I'll just go ahead and I think I can go over the changes again, not a presentation, because we already went through the procedural history, and the dates that I previously recited for policy EBB are the same for this policy as they were for IA. At the outset, I want to acknowledge that it's unusual to make revisions to the Code of Student Conduct mid-year. However, the changes in the Florida Administrative Code and the Florida statutes prompted staff to bring proposed changes to this current, the 2022-2023 Code of Student Conduct in a work session on February 21st. And in accordance with the school board's direction at the meeting, the changes that were made for this year, mid-year amendment to the code are to the level 4 procedures and the assessor in accordance with the Florida statutes and the Florida Administrative Code. We made then associated updates to the title page, the acknowledgement pages, updated to state that it's for the amended code, the code of conduct summary page, and the table of contents to reflect accurate information. There's comments in this particular red line for JIC. Sarah, you want to bring up the JIC one? If it's there. The comments are in the red line so that the public can see what changes are being made. And as was presented by the revision team at the work session, some of the local codes were added as a response to the assessor changes that left holes in discipline, such as arson and igniting, when we talked about that. There's a summary of changes to the Code of Student Conduct on pages 11 to 12. On BoardDocs there. And then there's also a section describing the school environment safety incident report SESR, and that's on page 34 in the attachment. The proposed amendment to the 2022-2023 Code of Student Conduct eliminates progressive discipline for bullying, harassment, threats, and sexual harassment, and that's all in accordance with the changes to SESR. We note, I think it's really important to note that no changes have been made to the current language regarding the dress code or progressive discipline for threats that we were talking about, like hazardous language and things like that, because they're not specifically related to statute, and there's a level 4 code that's all encompassing at this time. As we seek additional clarification from the Office of Safe Schools and the DOE and maybe some more administrative brainstorming, whatever that may look like, it's possible that progressive discipline can be reinstated for the 2023-2024 Code of Student Conduct. And those revisions we'll consider input from the community and administration, and we'll cover other topics discussed at the February 21st, 2023 work session. Remember, we talked about cell phones and dress code. District staff has conducted all the community meetings, and they're currently evaluating the survey responses. And from that input, staff will continue to make proposed changes and bring those proposed changes to you in a work session or two over the next few months. Those proposed changes will also include any changes in legislation that the legislature is doing now, and there's going to be new changes to Title IX, and we also heard to Title 5 and to 504. They're expected to be issued in the May of 2023. So that revision process will continue over the summer prior to scheduling the 2023-2024 Code of Student Conduct for a rule development workshop and final approval before the beginning of next school year. So similar with the way policy IA is going to be looked at for revisions, policy JIC and the Code of Student Conduct is also going to be brought back to you. This is just a mid-year amendment that we don't normally do.
Okay, Member Gallo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is coming before the board April 11th. Is that correct, Mrs. Inval?
That's correct.
So upon it, if it is approved on April 11th, when does it become effective?
Right upon approval on April 11th. So it's a mid-year code change. So the schools are going to have to go over those changes with students for the last month of school, 6 weeks of school.
So I guess, that's my concern, is that it is mid-level. It's time consuming, which I understand that we have to do it, but we're right in the middle of testing. So my concern is the availability of our educators to communicate it effectively with students, our ability to effectively communicate it to our parents, because some of these changes are massive, and we're going to see a lot more expulsions. We're going to see probably more arrests. We're going to see a lot of things that in the past haven't happened because we have to involve an SRO under every code that is coded for Sessor. And so my concern is, what plan have we put into place to make sure that we are effectively communicating this with our educators, with our parents, and with our communities? Because once this goes into effect, that very next day, they're going to start seeing the impact of that. So we should be communicating that now with the anticipation that maybe it's going to get approved. Because if we wait till then, if we wait till April, testing, I don't know how we get this done prior to the end of the school year, and do it appropriately. So I don't know if anybody can answer that question.
I don't know
plan, something with the board.
I don't know what has been discussed at the community meetings. I don't know if that was something that the discipline team went over at the community meetings, that we were having potential changes. I don't have that answer for you.
That I don't know. If someone could just, I agree with Member Gould, it doesn't penetrate far enough. But if we could just have a discussion on how it's going to be handled, since this is the last stop before approval on the board meeting.
I don't know. Do you know anything else?
This time, I don't know is it working?
No.
I mean, I can speak.
Yeah.
I don't have the information this morning. Okay. I don't have the information this morning on those community meetings. Ms. Joyner just joined us, so I believe that she would have information on how that would be communicated. Or if we do not at this time, then we will, I'm sure Ms. Joyner's team will work to, figure out how we're going to do that.
And I appreciate that. I'm just, as a board member, until I know what procedure is going to be in place for something this important, I'm hesitant to move it forward. Thank you.
So I will share that staff has great concern about bringing forward this change at this time of year for the very same reasons that Board Member Gallo has expressed, and they have asked if we are able to postpone the implementation of the changes and have those as part of the 2023-24 school year.
Of course. Member Gallo?
So my question would be, can we push this to the 2022-23 and still 23-24? Thank you, Member Gould. Can we do that without repercussions from the Department of Education? Because I know that this was a direct not assignment, but we were told that we needed to make these changes. We weren't given a lot of time to do so. So if we are allowed, and that's permissible, I would be in support of moving this forward to give us more time to react. Because the last thing that I want is for a child to, discipline's a problem, and we need to make sure that we have discipline. So this isn't about discipline. It's about making sure that everybody understands the changes, because it's not fair to our community to make sweeping changes such as this if we don't have the time to notify them and a plan in place on how to do so.
Board Member Gallo, I can't state with any certainty that there wouldn't be any repercussions. I do know that there are other school districts that are also making their changes mid-year because the statute does require that school districts adhere to the new Sessor codes. So in terms of what the repercussions would be, that's not something that we could understand, but the administrative code does require these changes.
Dr. Basquez.
We did discuss if we move forward, we would have to retrain all of our deans, assistant principals, and principals. We would have to start communication with our families relatively soon so that they are aware of that. Additionally, schools would have to present this information to their student body as well. I do have a question for council. Could we adopt it and give a grace period and then move forward? I'm hesitant because I know it's Cessor and all that we're dealing with, the Office of Safe Schools, but they've had the same conversations about consistency as we're still trying to deal with consistency with the current code of conduct, pulling staff for training at a time where they are going to start up with testing, but we're prepared to move forward because it was adopted mid-year.
So
February.
Dr. Vasquez, are you referring to adopting it with a delayed effective date for that provision?
Yes, if we're able to do that.
Okay. Mr. Palmerini? I'm sorry, Ms. Enval?
No, it's all right. I think he has the same concerns I do. I mean, the rule went into effect in January. So, and rulemaking takes some time. As we know, we had to propose in a work session. I would have some concerns that if we, I don't know, maybe Mr. Palmerini can express it a little bit differently than I want to.
Am I on now? Yes. You all have known me when rules go into effect and they have, say they are in effect now, I am always very hesitant to say, let's put off compliance with it until some point in the future. And I think it is a point of emphasis of the Office of Safe Schools to have these codes in place and being applied in there. So there's no answer in the statute that says we can bump this out. I think as soon as we can adopt it is probably what the intent was when the DOE passed the rule.
Thank you. And so moving forward, our team will prepare an aggressive schedule for training, given we have 4 weeks before it actually comes to the board again. And then that'll allow us to provide the communication to parents for the last 4 or 5 weeks of school.
Member Gallo, back to you for follow-up.
Thank you. Okay, so the board can anticipate some formulation of a plan prior to the board meeting so that we can understand how we're going to move forward with this aggressive plan to implement.
Yeah, there is a plan. There's a framework of the plan. There will be a training schedule that we will be able to provide to you, as well as communication that will be sent out to our families, and the schools would, just as they did at the beginning of the school year, do a code of conduct review with their student body so that they're aware of the changes. But we can formalize that in a document and present to the board.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Vasquez.
Member Gould.
In follow-up to this, and Ms. Enval and Mr. Palmerini, if we have a schedule of a phased training approach for this, we are going to approve, we assume we will approve it at the next board meeting, because I'm not hearing any dissent, not that we can because it's statute, but if we have a plan for a phased approach that maybe doesn't make it so intensive at the time where we could actually put student grades at risk, because it would be distracting our educators to be training on this and implementing testing and any reinforcement for testing. Because if students need help before going into a test and they're seeking their teachers, administrators, and so on, and they are at a mandatory training session, they will not be available to our students. So I'm wondering if we could phase it and still satisfy showing that we are in good intention implementing, but we're doing it with fidelity.
And if I may, Madam Chair, I think that the fact that we're making the change to the policy mid-year, right after the rule's implemented, which is not usually what's happening, and you're going to have a planned approach for training and implementation, I think you're on much better footing than not doing anything at all. It is the rule. We have to presume that it's valid and we need to follow it. I don't know what the phased-in approach would look like with respect to training. I know testing is coming up and that's a consideration, and I'm sure they'll take that into consideration when they're looking at it. But this would require students to sign the new cover page again and go through all that. So the communication is.
But you have to train the staff first. So if there's X number, because you could start with staff that aren't as essential to the testing model. I don't know. That's for you to figure out. But I think if we are, as long as we're taking steps forward and then can implement as soon as possible the full process, it seems that we would be meeting Safe Schools' desires.
So I'll ask the team to put together in writing, because I know we've been having discussions about it, so commit it to paper, and then let's have a final draft that we can share with the board prior to the board meeting. And at that time, I'll be able to really tell you the extent, because some of my recollection is that it's not going to be easy. Even the paperwork has to be revised.
Right.
And so.
And maybe that's part of the plan. So, within 20 days of the approval, the paperwork will be revised within 30 days. So that we are not crushing our staffs.
Right.
Or our families, because this is going to be whiplash.
Right. Well, I want to make sure that we're doing everything
Yep.
that we're supposed to. So there may even be parts of it or the more significant concerns that we can address first and make that
By priority.
the priority,
Right.
and then phase in the ones that are much minor later. So we'll bring back something to staff, I would say the Friday before the board meeting, so you have the weekend to look it over and a couple of days.
Thank you. Wait, and then I had another question, and not so much about what we're having to do right now, but with our discipline task force, there is going to need to be another bite at this apple before school starts in August. So, maybe we could get a little time frame on what that looks like too, from the time that we take all of the input, kind of chew through it and figure out what we can do now and later. Just so that we have a sense, because it's going to be a busy summer trying to prepare for the new school year with all of the new legislative rules plus our own work that we're doing at the community level. So if that's something that maybe we could also get a little schedule on, that would be great. Thank you.
Member Ferrand.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Let's see, quick question. So I had a concern come up, and I don't know, I'm assuming this is the time, but for a code of conduct with regards to security breach, is there currently a code that is for security breach? I don't think so, correct? No. So I had a principal bring this up where they had a student open a door for someone outside to come in. It was Uber Eats. And so came in, I dropped the stuff off. The student allowed the Uber Eats driver to come into campus. Are we saying Uber Eats drivers are going to do anything? I highly doubt it. But the fact that it was that easy to do that. And so the principal had to issue an other. And so the parent is like, really? My kid's getting a level 4 for other? But if it was security breach and they got a level 4, the parent would be maybe more understanding. So if there was a way that we could create our own, that would be security breach. I don't know how we could do that.
So if I may, we've had several conversations with, I'm sorry, Madam Chair. Sorry. It's been a long morning.
It's not morning anymore.
Yeah,
That's
well,
how
sorry,
long it's
and
been.
lunch is ready. So we've had a lot of discussion with the Office of Safe Schools, and they really are wanting us to mirror the assessor codes. And so our staff could certainly take a look at that, but we have, really are moving towards the code of conduct, mirroring exactly what are part of the assessor codes. What we could do is see if there is a place for us to put that. Maybe other districts have done that. I'm assuming they gave them other serious misconduct is what the code was.
Right.
Other serious misconduct, and which, I mean, I agree with that determination. But we're trying not to move away from what those assessor codes are in in our level 4s. And assessor ironically has levels as well. And most of their levels are in our level 4, which is confusing to DOE as well. So we can take a look at it, but we're trying to mirror what DOE has as part of assessor.
Okay, so this would be something that I would maybe need to take with.
No, our staff will look at it.
Okay.
And see how other districts have done it, and if there's a way, because sometimes we can even put in the description on the actual referral that might say security or
security breach
or something
like
that's more like safety, something compromising safety or something to that extent, that would allow us to stay in line with the assessor reporting system and still meet your needs. So our team will take a look at that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Let's see. The last one, and this is, I think, just procedural, but can we create an online form or way for teachers to report when there is a discipline issue? Right now they do it paperwork style, correct? Or no? Right. Is there a way for us as a district? I mean, I think that would be helpful for teachers to have an online way to, you type it in, it gets sent immediately to the office instead of us having to do paperwork at the teacher level, like stop the whole class and what with the teaching that's happening and learning to write everything out, and then it goes to the office, and then they also have to do paperwork. That's just my 2 cents, if that could help.
I mean, that would, Deminky, go ahead.
That would be a question for Alicia Leonard. When we first got Skyward, we discussed going paperless and having referral in Skyward. So that would be a question for her department to see if we can work through that.
And you said that was Alicia
Leonard.
Yes, we'll follow up. She is our business process analyst that handles all things Skyward. There may be a cost associated with that, and because what I'm understanding is you really also want it to be like a drop down so that it'll populate some of the things based on the information that's in Skyward.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
We'll take a look at that. Probably will take a little bit of time.
Yeah, of
but
course,
yes.
of course. This is huge first. I get it.
Follow up on the security breach question. We have very strong policies on the hardening of our schools and everything going through our front desk. So even if it's not called out on this sheet, would that offense not be covered under our policies?
No, it's covered. My understanding is that the parent, because we don't have something that specifically says security breach, was taken aback that they would get a level 4 and other.
But can't we solve that by attaching the policy that says, don't open up any other doors and let strangers in? Everything goes through the front office.
We have in the past, as board members have given us feedback, tried to tweak our code of conduct so that some things were clearer or they varied in what they were. Again, the only angst I have, and I'm not saying it can't be resolved, is that we really are moving towards being more aligned with the offenses, the assessor offenses and the way they're reported.
No, and I totally understand that. So that's why I think the concern was that the parent really didn't understand the other part as well. And if we were to cite the policies that were broken, maybe that would, because we may get into a lot of issues that are not explicit there, but are code of conduct issues because they fly in the face of our security and safety policies or vandalism or all kinds of crazy things. Yeah.
But I also don't think Uber Eats is allowed as part of our food and nutrition policy either. So
I do want to just add that Ms. Joyner's team's done an excellent job of adding examples into the Code of Student Conduct in each section. So where there is the other section that's not Cessor, because there will now be the other for Cessor and then the local code that does not cover what's in Cessor. There's a list that they are looking at for the code for the fall that could consider any changes. Those are all administrative changes that are not legal, but those examples can be added in if it's appropriate.
All right, Member Felder.
Just very quickly, I want to just kind of piggyback on what Board Member Farron said regarding the discipline and teachers being able to record it. Miki, I don't know if that is possible, but as a former teacher, sometimes the paper gets lost when the teacher writes a referral and it doesn't, the top layer gets, because I had the same experiences. So what I started doing, I started giving the copy to the discipline officers, and I kept the original because somehow or another got lost. But if you put it in that computer, if it goes back, nothing is ever deleted. If you put it inside that computer, the teacher do a drop down, even if the administrator for whatever reason can't find it or gets lost, while she's giving an assignment and they're looking at the laptop doing something, she could very quickly put a referral in. So I don't know the price or the cost of all that, superintendent, but if that could be worked out for teachers, they don't have to stop to write a referral, that is workable. And I just want to say that for the teachers, that works. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Felder. Anything else? Ms. Enval.
Oh,
Dr. Vasquez.
I need to
Yes, you
announce
need
an
to make an
executive
announcement.
session. Yes, sorry.
I'm reminding you.
Yes, thank you. Glad you said that. Okay, so assuming we concluded all of our policy discussion, yes?
Yes, we did.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Pursuant to Section 286.011, subsection 8 Florida statutes, and in accordance with Board Policy BEC, an entity may meet in private with its attorney to discuss pending litigation to which the entity is presently a party before a court or administrative agency, provided certain conditions are met, including the requirement that a transcript of the executive session be made part of the public record upon conclusion of the litigation. In this case, I'm requesting the school board's advice concerning pending litigation in Bernice Rodriguez, OBO, JR, a minor, of Orange versus Orange County Public School Board, in case number 6-22-CV-00411-PGB-LHP. That's a federal case citation. That will be Tuesday, April 4th, 2023 at 1:00 p.m. The executive session will be a closed meeting held in conference room E at the ELC and will take approximately 2 hours. I have 2 others to add, but I first, and a notice has been drafted for posting, I need to list those in attendance for that particular case. Is going to be Teresa Jacobs, Chair, Angie Gallo, Vice Chair, Melissa Bird, School Board Member, I'm just going to go down. Sorry. Maria Salamanca, School Board Letter, Alicia Ferrant, School Board Member, Pam Gould, School Board Member, Vicki Feldborn, School Board Member, Karen Castor-Denner, School Board Member, and Melissa Bird, School Board Member, along with Dr. Maria Vasquez, Superintendent, John Palmerine, Deputy General Counsel, and in that particular case, it's going to be Gail Bradford, who's our outside counsel and a court reporter. Following that executive session, we're going to have one on Catherine Carnes versus OCSB in case number 2002 CA-000714-0. Same time right after that, Tuesday, April 4th at 1. Those in attendance will be those that I mentioned already, but instead of Gail Bradford as Esquire, it would be Michelle Morales, who is our outside counsel. Following that executive session, we're going to have one in the case styled as Association to Preserve the Eatonville Community Incorporated versus the School Board of Orange County in case number 2023-CA-005295-0. Same thing, Tuesday, April 4th at 1 o'clock p.m., closed meeting in Conference Room E. And those in attendance will the school board members that are here, John Palmerini, Deputy General Counsel, the Superintendent, and those outside counsel representing us in that case is Chris Wilson and Jad Brewer, Staff Attorney, along with a court reporter. So that's April 4th at 1 o'clock p.m. I believe it's all been reserved on your calendars from 1 to 3. There's 3 cases. The first 2 I don't think will take very long. Well, actually, I don't think any of them are going to take very long, but we're going to go ahead and reserve 2 hours just in case. So, thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. With that, thank you all very much for the presentation. With that, the meeting is done. Adjourned.